was chained by a beast locked in slumber. Sin washed away by the swift flow of time. I may know the answers. Journeys over snow and sand. What twist of fate has brought us to tread upon this land? Blessed by light and the burden of shadows, souls abide to an endless desire. I may know the answers. Though one question I still hear, what twist of fate has brought us to roads that run so near? Distant worlds together, miracles from realms beyond. The light burns inside me to sing to you this song, to sing with you this song, to sing to you your song.
Good morning and welcome everyone to LoreLines, episode 125. Today we are going to be talking about Final Fantasy XI and Vana'diel. For those of you who did not catch the Gateway Fate event last week, we did have a live episode there, which was posted last night. So if you have not seen that, that's what happened to episode 124. You can go ahead and check that out on our Twitch and our YouTube page. So, Gateway Fate. Aeneas, we were both there. Do you want to give us your quick recap about your 11 panel?
Oh God, yeah. So Gateway Fate was so busy for me. I had 4 panels. I was on stage for the contest. I've never been busier at an event. I got so overwhelmed at my 11 panel because there were so many people there. I was not expecting that many people to be invested. So that was truly kind of a humbling moment for me. A friend did grab a few photos of that, so if anyone's following me on Twitter, you'll have seen a few of them. I got very into the discussion and totally lost track of time. 1 hour is not nearly enough to even scratch the surface of the ways in which 11 has impacted 14. TLDR, all the best parts of 14 can be traced back to 11 directly, and more specifically, one person.
And
I
that's
He
know
happens
the
to be my
person.
favorite.
awesome.
I do have still to.
Yeah.
I still have to draw him for you.
Yeah, I will cry real tears. I will cry very loudly. I look forward to it.
No, the Catman, as far as I know, has not infected 11, but we'll find out. We'll find out. So my
Infected
journey-
is a good definition.
There is
There's a much
Catman.
better Catman.
Yeah, there's a significantly better Catman, and they took his animations for Emmett Selk.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so- really? Okay. We'll
Yeah.
talk about
Yep.
this.
We'll talk about this.
That's
I hope-
fantastic.
Cobb, I hope you have Google ready to pull up visuals.
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay.
All right, let me just open up Google so I have that ready. I'm not a liar. I'm just chronologically challenged. So,
Fair.
It's a Yumi.
hey, Yumi. So
I'm late because I was busy doing
you're
I was
not
busy
late.
doing laundry.
You're on time. So as Aeneas, you said, a lot of 14's more interesting elements are actually rooted in 11. I don't know a lot of it, so my journey with 11 is I opened an account when the game came out here in the States in like 2002, something like that, 2003. And I played it for like a month, and I was like, I don't like this game. I'm gonna go play WoW. And then many years later,
That's
after I'm
me.
obsessed with 14, I go back and I play 11, and I was like, oh, I see what this game's trying to do. This is actually interesting. This is pretty good. And then I was playing and, just relaxing, and then story things started to happen. And I was like, okay, this is becoming more coherent the more I go into it. And it's not just
Mhm.
about how racist Bastok is. But,
I
the
just
fact...
did a hard stop at. I got a run for, and Arden was actually there helping me along. Do you remember that, Arden?
Yeah.
I stopped after that. I
Mhm.
uninstalled, and I tried to reinstall recently, and I kept fighting with it, and it just wouldn't work for me. So I uninstalled it finally and just said, "Screw it."
Yeah,
It's okay.
sometimes play online is harder than an ultimate.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
why we
it's-
put the hardest
It-
boss
the-
is the wait screen.
The heart, because FF11 was released in like 2001, 2002 time
Yeah.
period, depending on your region. Play Online is like from the 90s because
Mm-hmm.
it was originally designed to be a platform where they could launch more PC games. The idea was to like combine AOL and what we now know as Steam into
Yeah.
one thing, and that did not pan out because it was not the time yet. So now Play Online exists solely as a vessel for attempting to play FF11.
Some of my friends from back then would claim it doesn't even exist as that. It exists exclusively to play the freaking card game in there.
Okay, yeah, that's also fair.
I had some friends who stayed subscribed to 11 just to play that.
You can access the Play Online launcher without a subscription. You don't have to pay rent on Vana'diel to play the card game.
I thought you did.
No! You don't!
This is so funny.
Anyway, we digress.
Do we not all digress here?
You're the one who digresses the most.
Correct. That's why. That's why I'm saying that. I'm encouraging them to
have you
digress.
put on a leash.
digress.
Oh my god.
So,
Oh god, okay.
All right.
How do we start talking about Final
Well,
Fantasy XI?
I guess we should talk about it from a perspective of people like me who are just kind of starting to scratch at the actual story, which
Okay.
from my perspective, I finished the base game. I defeated the Shadow Lord, which apparently was not very easy in the base game.
No.
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 Even when I
Not every-
played between the Treasures of Ergen and Wings of the Goddess coming out, people were still having a hard time with Shadow Lord.
Yeah, so a
Every
few
time I hear
expansions
Shadow
in.
Lord, I think Nier.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
Oh no, I did that the first time I was playing through to Ayumi. Every time he came up in story, I was doing the Shadow Lord dialogue.
Oh my god.
With that
I love
inflection.
Kaine, and that is one
I
of
have
her
Yoko Taro brain rot.
best
So-
rants.
Yeah, so here's a bit of gameplay history for Final Fantasy XI because the level cap did not increase the same way that it does in 14. We're used to here we get an extra 10 levels every expansion, right? Expansions in 11 would release oftentimes at the current level cap. So I believe, Arden, correct me if I'm wrong, because I did not play until much later. The base game level cap was 50.
Yes.
Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And the next few expansions would release with that same level cap, and the stories were designed for you to pick them up like on a different job and then play through it, or you could play through it at the level cap. And then in later expansions, they would start increasing the level cap. And once we got to 75, that was another kind of hard cap where several expansions were released intended to be played at that. And then
Yeah, I think the
eventually
level
they
cap
capped
was
at
like
99.
Yeah, the level cap was 75 for I think almost 10 years.
Yeah, that was the biggest one. And then once you hit the level cap, you could switch your XP meter to something called merit points, which could be used to unlock more abilities for your job.
Which in
'Cause-
Final Fantasy 14 terms is really similar to the system that they added towards the end of the Bosnia questline where you get the points that you spend on like
yeah,
green, red, and blue.
yes. Yeah, so you could get like stat increases, but like combat in 11 plays like from a list menu and you could set up macros for certain abilities. So think about it like the game immediately before it, Final Fantasy X, you had to do a whole bunch of stuff to get new abilities, right? It's functionally that system as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how endgame content functioned. But because of that, they had very weird level syncs on certain instances for story the first time you're going through it. So like beating a story was considered endgame content because those
Yeah.
instances were
Oh,
a
wow.
pain in the ass. Like imagine Deluberum Regine Savage being like the base endgame content.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it like oftentimes it did require parties of that size. Wasn't the original Promathia instance like you had to have 24 players who were fully geared and very good at their job in order to beat it? Like there were people who never
So-
beat certain expansions.
So it wasn't exactly fully geared, but let's take just the first Prometheans, for example.
Oh god.
We, even at level 75 cap, so Prometheans are no longer level capped in the modern era. You can go in there on a level 99 with your most busted gear now. And there's actually things to kill for level 99s in there now because they've
Yep.
redistributed the mobs in the zones.
The Apollyon.
But back then, the initial Prometheans were capped at level 30. And you had to go in, when I first started playing, you had to go in with level 30 gear because it would unequip all of your equipment. So there was like specific gear that people would either buy or keep to go in there that helped with like the empty mob types and all this other stuff. And you would go in there with a full alliance of 18 people at least and run through the zone together. And most of the running through the zone together was the poor healers casting sneak and invis on the entire party to get through.
Yeah. And part of why the game is so playable now is because the level sync debuff no longer does anything. They couldn't remove the debuff entirely, but like they've made it so that it has no status effect.
Yeah.
So it means that you can blast through like 98% of the story as long as you're at max level, which is fine. It makes it more accessible, right? Same thing with adding trust. You can basically summon any NPC in the game at any point in time to help you with content. So you're never truly playing through it on a solo run.
I will
But that's
say-
how the content in 11 used to run.
I will say after playing 11, I vastly prefer the trust system in 11 to the one in 14.
Right,
It's
'cause
so
you can
much
use it in
better.
your overworld, because it's not just like you queue into a specific instance with a trust member. You can summon like up to 4 at a time in the overworld, like a fucking chocobo you would in 14. And it's pretty much every NPC. As long as you finish their story, you can get
Yeah.
them.
Mm-hmm. And
And also you do get to eventually summon more than 4,
yeah.
if I recall correctly, as long as you do Rhapsodies of Vana'diel.
Right,
Because
yeah.
Rhapsodies gives you so many stupidly powerful key
It
items
does.
to
Hey,
help.
that's why they
catch you up.
recommend it. But the hard
Yeah.
part about Rhapsodies is if you just mainline Rhapsodies, you've spoiled yourself for the entire game because it's meant to
Yeah.
be a recap for players who've like, okay, this is the last expansion. Let's
Mhm.
walk through time and kind of like go through all of our memories of this game. And it's like, okay, but I just beat the Shadow Lord like
Yep.
2 days ago.
That's
And then
never-
another storyline came out afterwards anyway.
Right, yeah. But
That-
that's another thing we should mention. So there were expansions that were chronologically important, but you did not have to play them chronologically. So ones we're primarily going to be talking about today because they have relevance for the Alliance raids is the base game into Rise of the Zealot into Chains of Promathia. You could start any storyline at any point in time. And not all of the expansions were connected. There's a series of mini expansions, one of which is Shantoto's Ascension, which is just like a small side story that you can pick up and do at any time, even if you're underleveled. And it's like its own like mini isolated thing, except not really in the context of lore. But it was just kind of like a fun little random thing that they included.
Yeah, and I guess for anyone who's thinking about picking up Final Fantasy XI, one of the most confusing things for a new player right now is you will just sometimes zone into an area and get a cutscene with an expansion title, and you're going to be like, what the fuck is this?
That happened to me so
And
many
then-
times.
Yeah.
I walked
I
into
love that
Juno
the
and
new-
everyone saw Crystal, and I was like, what is happening?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was gonna mention. Because like you walk into Juno for the first time now, and it'll be like it'll at least ask you if you want to start the expansion, and I recommend saying no until it's time to get there. Because if you the new player experience, if you hit yes, you walk into Juno for the first time, the major hub city, and you see one of the major NPCs that you have to spend your base game with as a child. And you don't understand why he's there. And you're like, didn't I just talk to you as a fully grown man? And the child says some very cryptic bullshit, and then a crystal appears and lies to you, and then you leave. And then you have to keep going about your day like that.
Wait, it was lying?
Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar.
Yeah, listen, okay. Here's the big thing. Don't trust the lady in the crystal. Never trust the lady in the crystal who's telling you she's a god. She is lying to you. And
Uh-huh.
she never has your
Vana'diel
best
is a
interests
heretic.
at heart.
And people thought we were off our rocker for not trusting Heidelin.
No.
I had entirely different reasons for not trusting Heidelin because any association with Ethereum were going to make me flip my
True.
table.
I think it was a
I
month
just-
or two back, maybe more. I went on an entire spiel about that quest in one of the Discord channels in here, I remember. 'Cause I was just,
I just go by Final Fantasy 12 standards. Vana'diel is a heretic. Vana'diel is a heretic.
It's true.
Yeah.
At least, like, the goddess in 11, her name is Altana. I could kind of see her logic, even if I don't agree with her actions, because while her intentions were good, she's just not smart about how she decided to deal with things.
Oh, fun.
True.
Yeah, it's a whole fucking thing. But anytime something goes wrong in the world, Altana is like, oh, I can just put a band-aid on it, and then it's like nothing ever happened, and that band-aid is just hiding like a deep gaping wound that really needs to be tended to, but nobody does anything about it.
That sounds
It's-
terrible.
Yeah, no, it's awful. Imagine like being sliced in half with a sword and just kind of being taped back together and say, see, it's fine. It's the same amount of matter that was there before. Nothing's wrong. And it's like, I'm still cut in half.
Okay, so very Bunavelse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very graphic. I'm sorry. I'm still drinking my coffee.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
It it gave me
It runs in the
right,
family, Cobb. It runs in the family.
it gave me the right amount of like horrified, "Ugh,"
Right.
which I don't know how else to
Yeah.
describe it other than "Ugh."
Lessons in the new age of Final Fantasy: don't trust the light.
Mhm.
In the infamous words of Galuljaw and Cobb, "Wah!"
Oh God,
What the fuck was that?
some really good voice acting. Okay, well, I guess we can kind of recap some 11 story stuff and then go into why it matters for 14 now, as well as the Alliance raids. I think that's probably the best way to go about this.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
here's
Can
your
I make-
spoiler
can
warning,
I-
I guess.
Can I make one request?
Yes,
That we end up talking rainbows and cognition.
we'll get there.
Thank you.
I promise.
Yeah, we'll get there.
We'll get there.
Calm
But
down, Meowth.
in order to get there, we kind of have to have an understanding of the story, because throwing it at people without context is very confusing, at least in my opinion.
Which is why you need a guide to get through all of it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
A Sherpa is critical to your enjoyment of Final Fantasy XI.
Yeah, for real.
So the base game of 11 is actually very simple. You pick one of 3 starting cities, Sandoria, Windhurst, or Bastock. These cities actually look very similar to Ul'dah, New Gridania, and Limsa Lominsa, very aesthetically. And as far as other parallels go, Sandoria is filled with Elevin, which became Elizin in 14, and all of them have French names that are very hard to pronounce. So we've got a
They're
little bit of
so
Ishgardian culture
bad.
there too.
Ronfar.
Yeah.
It's like,
Ronfar.
for just as a frame of reference for everyone on how hard the Elvan names are, it's like worse than
Yeah, it's
Ishgardian NPCs. There's no pronouncing them if you don't know French.
Yeah, it's a fun time. And then some of them are easier to pronounce if you have to spend more time with them. While we're on this topic, there is a pathetic man-child of a prince in Sandoria named Prince Treon. There is a regular recurring side quest you can pick up from one of his house stewards to try and get him a wife. And what this quest entails is finding another player character who fits the random description that you've been given, and having them in your party and presenting them to the steward for the prince, who will inevitably turn them
Fantastic.
down. Yeah, this is a recurring theme, is that he cannot find a wife. And the more time you spend with him, the more obvious it becomes why.
Yeah.
And it's not because he has
this is
loads of money.
basically
Yeah.
so this is basically Elf Magnite. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh
it's Elf
my
Magnite.
God.
Fiddlestein.
You're entirely correct, Meow.
Wow.
You're entirely. He's just looking for his Nama. Yeah. God, that's hilarious. Fuck, I loved that. So that's just something that you will pick up when you go to, because you have to go to the Sandorian castle many times for a quest. You just have to deal with the nobility because you're like a high-ranking mercenary, is basically your position in the game. You as a player character are just kind of tangential for the first few stories. Like, other characters are the main character, and you as a person don't start becoming super relevant until Chains of Promathia. In the
So
base
like
game,
wow.
yeah, like WoW. But in the
Yeah,
base
exactly.
game,
Like wow.
in the base game, you're just running around between these 3 city-states to kind of like gain political standing and like establish yourself as a mercenary worthy on going on big adventures. And at this point in time, you come to like other cities as well that aren't considered like a home city. The most critical of which is Juneau, which is very centrally located. It's like the strongest city-state, both militarily, economically. It's just like a really, really flourishing city. It's also absolutely beautiful. I need to share some of the concept art for it at some point because
Yeah.
it's gorgeous. There's really nothing like it. It's a city that's built on like an island cliff connected to all parts of the Vana'diel continent with bridges. It is like towering spires. Think of like the grandest Lord of the Rings elven style city that you can think of. And at the very tippy top of it, there is a garden called the Relude Gardens, which I am so hoping is the like instanced home base for the Alliance raid
Yes,
in
Oh my
14.
me
god,
too.
that would be amazing.
The fact that we already have a screenshot of like the lower ugh, my coffee. The fact that we already have a
Don't blame it on
screenshot
that.
of the lower Juno city street in what probably is going to be a combat instance based on the sky. We can get to that in a bit. We can't talk about that yet. I would love for Relude to be kind of the home base, partially because that's where you're going to be picking up most of your main quests and having most of your cutscenes for the first like whole story arc that spans multiple expansions in 11.
So,
And the reason, go ahead.
I have to ask, do you think we're gonna see Mott as an NPC?
We better.
That would be funny.
Because he's
Yeah.
already got an XP in Ul'dah. Like he's already kind of there. But to actually see him and him be like, if you want to do anything else, if you want to progress, if you want to get past me, you have to beat me. And it's apparently a very hard fight at level 70, which I have not actually done yet.
It's not that bad. This is another thing where like the scaling of time makes it easier. For viewers who want context, Mott is an NPC like in the backyard of the palace, who is the person that you limit break with. And a limit break is increasing your level cap. So your original level cap is 50, and then in increments of 5 after that, you have to go back to Mott and complete a side quest in order to raise your level cap again. This does culminate with you fighting him at some point. And then there is one of the quests that involve compressing your soul into an egg and laying it before consuming it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's the one to get to 85 or 90, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah. This is a whole thing. Souls
I
being
can't-
eggs comes up a lot. It's very weird.
Yeah.
It's
I
always
also can't remember if that's the one that involves the brown mage or not.
It is. Yeah, that's the level cap prior.
Okay,
there's
yeah,
also
yeah.
a limit break that involves you shitting your pants in the palace.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy XI is such a serious game, but it has so much of that classical Final Fantasy charm too.
Yeah, yeah. Charlie has been like praying for months that we're gonna get brown mage as a limited job in 14.
No. No. We don't. We don't need that. This is all cursed side content. I don't know that we'll get Mott in there. If they populate Relude Gardens as like a home base instance, like they did with the Sky Pirates, then for sure he'd be one of them.
Mom
I
would
would-
be the gear person.
right.
Unique.
What?
Now that we're talking about eggs laying down an egg and
You're gonna go
like
right
some-
into Nier, aren't you?
No, I was actually thinking how much it reminds me of the summoning sequence of Zodiac in 12.
Oh
I thought
yeah,
you were
yeah.
gonna go into the Seat of Destruction.
We'll
That
get
works
there.
though.
Put a pin in that, Meowth. We'll get there. We'll get. There's a specific
Oh.
cutscene in Wings of the Goddess.
I guess one
We'll
other-
get with.
One other piece of context for Mott is when you fight him, he is the same job as you, but also still has monk abilities, which is one of the things that makes him difficult.
That's
So there was
bullshit.
someone on my server who had attempted to beat Mott 66 times at the time that I like started playing, and that number just kept going up as I was doing my new player experience, and they never beat Mott in the several years I played. So they were just stuck at level 70 while everyone else was doing level 75 stuff.
It's
F.
rough. Yeah. The other part that I feel like we should mention is if you want a really good experience of what 11 was like mechanically, go do Eureka for a very long period of time. It's the same fast travel system. The fact that you have to keep swapping gear to do different things, that's basically how 11 rating worked. Because you didn't like get best in slot for your level cap and stay there. It was like, okay, for this fight we need this specific gear, and you will still go into level 99 content with like a level 50 rating because it still has the best stats. But the other thing is like quest objectives. You've got a challenge log. And that's it. Good luck. I hope you paid attention to the conversation.
Yeah, I hope you wrote down things in your little notebook that you got with your collector's edition, which is no longer
right.
Yeah.
God, if anyone has a copy of the collector's edition of 11, I'm actively looking for one. That's my simple promo there. But like you really had to be paying attention in 11 in a way that you probably don't in 14 because you have a mini map telling you where to go. That's also not a thing in 11, but that's less relevant to this conversation. Other NPCs I would love to see in Relude Gardens, Momboro and Wolfgang Arden.
Yeah.
I need to see them bickering in a corner.
Yeah.
So Wolfgang is like a high-ranking lieutenant of Juno's army. He is this human man who, with a stick up his ass, is probably the best way to describe him. He has a vendetta, and he doesn't know what it's against.
That's a movie life.
Momboro is an Eleven, you can tell because his name is French sounding, who became like a battlefield medic and kind of a nurse. So he's an ambassador on behalf of Bastock to Juno. So you can see him sometimes in Juno, sometimes in Bastock, depending on like which quest you're on, where the NPC needs to be, that sort of thing, right? There is like an ongoing thing where they are like childhood best friends who exchanged like gemstones with each other in a lifelong promise. The whole thing is the same energy as Sid and Nero in 14, going through a divorce for the second time, but also still dating as they're signing the divorce paperwork. It's the exact same energy, and it keeps coming up in the main story quests. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, fun fact, Momboro is also one of the most annoying trusts to get, and he's like a chemist.
Yeah.
So that if he shows up, that's going to be a whole wormhole with people speculating about new 14 jobs again.
I know, because here's the thing is if Momboro shows up, that's basically just the Gradanian goldsmith. I'm gonna be entirely honest with you. I'm dead serious. So them bickering in a corner would also be like my cameo wish, because they do show up in Relude very often. Back on track, the reason that the Relude Gardens is so critical for you to like keep coming back to for story stuff is because that is also the seat of power of Archduke Comlinot and his older brother Ealdonarch, who does look to be about 12. I promise Ealdonarch is the older brother by like several thousand years.
Yeah.
He just got stuck like that.
So I'm in the first expansion, and I know as far as where I'm at, they're pieces of shit. I don't know if that holds. So
you'll see.
Okay.
This is going to contain spoilers for you, Cobb, but they are still enjoyable to play through.
Yeah.
So they tell you that, and they're correct in this. We just don't find out until later that it's because they're like 14,000 plus years old. For context, they are older than the period of time where we've been sundered in the source. We don't have exact years, but think older than our ancients.
Yeah.
Yeah. The timeline for 11 events is way longer than in 14 at this point in time. That's probably going to change. But I digress. So they say, hey, the Shadow Lord is awakening again, and you get a whole bunch of exposition where 20 years prior to the start of the game, there was the Crystal War, where the Shadow Lord and his beastmen waged war against the city-states. And they're all in like a period of recovery from that and have just kind of gotten back to like a good standard of socioeconomic status. Like their cities are recovered, like trade routes are open, economies are thriving. And there's stirrings of the Shadow Lord awakening again. So you go on a whole bunch of convoluted fetch quests. Seriously, it takes so much time. Like, the base game is maybe 45 minutes of cutscenes and like 40 hours of running around trying to get where you need to go in order to pick up a rock.
Yeah.
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 Yep.
One of these quests involves gathering magicite from holy sites of crystals that aren't entirely natural. We don't know that until later in the game. But this is where we get the concept of nethicite in 12, is from this. Magicite in 11 functions the way that nethicite does in 12. So keep that as a frame of reference. Once we've gathered all the magicite, Comlinot says, great, in order to defeat the Shadow Lord again, you must take the magicite to his throne room. Because that's where, like, the seat of his power is. So we do that. The thing is, the Shadow Lord wasn't really waking up until we set all of the magicite on pedestals in the throne room, and then he rose from his coffin and we had to defeat him. This is why that throne room screenshot that we got for the Echoes of Vana'diel Alliance raid preview was so important, because those 6 pillars of colored rock that you see in front of it, that's the magicite. Very clearly on display. So it tells us a lot about the story that they're just giving us that to start with.
So,
yep.
Question. I would be raising my hand, but you can see me. Does that mean that the player character in 11, by placing the magicite in there, awakens the Shadow Lord? So you could say that effectively we've been bamboozled?
Oh, yeah. Comlinot fully lies to you.
Okay.
But you don't find that out until later. So
Okay.
It's a really funny transition into Rise of the Zealot. So you defeat... Yeah, we'll get there. It's really funny. Because it's the same thing as 14, where they did the base game, and they're like, we don't know how successful this is going to be, so we're not going to, like, make too much of a cliffhanger into the next expansion. So you defeat the Shadow Lord. Everything is all well and good in the world. Except
no.
Yeah. The fun thing about the Shadow Lord is that he wasn't actually wrong. We'll talk about why he became and how he became the Shadow Lord later, because it's kind of a really big retroactive reveal.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, the story is that there was this Galka, which is where Rugadin came from in 14, are not treated very well by Bastok. Bastok is full of racists, and that's just kind of how it is. Mind you, this is like 40 years prior to the start of the game. Just to give a timeline context. There was a Galka named Raugrim, and Raugrim was a very kind-hearted spirit. He was curious about the world. He went on all sorts of expeditions. Think Kettenrem energy, if that helps, in 14 terms. Trying to compare this to 14 is so difficult, Arden. I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
So he went on all sorts of expeditions, like he went to other city-states. He genuinely was just someone who wanted to learn more about the world. He was also something called a tale keeper, which is someone who holds like pneumatic memory of like the story of Vana'diel inside of you. This is like a title, and I'm hoping is going to be the name of the last expansion in 14. Again, not relevant right now, but I just think tale keeper would be such an
It'd be so
way.
good.
Right,
Yeah.
There's a transition from Traveler to Talekeeper that becomes apparent only when you play 11, which is why I recommend people at the very least go watch cutscenes, because this isn't something I can put into words. But on one of these expeditions, it was a multiracial expedition that lasted many, many months to the northern continent, where Raugrim and a human woman fell in love. And one of the men from Bastok who was on this expedition didn't like that, so he conspired to kill Raugrim, and the woman took the hit for him. Consumed by his grief, Raugrim made a bargain to gain power so that this would never happen to anyone else ever again. And that was when he became the Shadow Lord. He became fully consumed by this need to wage war, to create peace. Which is contradictory, and was part of the bargain, was that he kind of lost his mind a little. So when you defeat the Shadow Lord, you're not like killing this horrible man. You are releasing him from this seat of power that was causing him to wage war. And Raugrim kind of gets to return to himself again. Which is very nice.
That's so Arden. It hurts.
Yeah, and it's That's where the base game ends. And then you go start Rise of the Zealot, which you just go talk to a general in a room. It's a very inconspicuous quest, right? It's like, okay, we'll go start the next expansion. Where's the story go from here? And the cutscene starts with you talking to them, and they're like, wow, you really hit your head on your way out of Castle's Fall. Here's
Yeah.
what really happened.
Mhm.
And then you
Yeah.
get this huge epic cutscene where all of that happens. And then after that, Kamlanot and Eldadar show up, and they're like, oh, now that the pollution of, like, the corruption of the Shadowlord's power is gone from the crystals, we can enact our real plan. And they summon the fucking Archangels, which are these 5 goth twinks who appear from each of the, like, the split mother crystals and start attacking you, because their goal is to reunite these crystals that have been split in a type of sundering that was just an evolution instead of, like, a single strike from a false god. Because they want to bring their ancient society back to power and, like, restore eternal paradise. And you get all of that, like, a 5-minute flashback cutscene that, like,
Yup.
you, in canon, forgot because you hit your head on your
Yeah.
way out of Castle's Fall.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh shit. So the reason that we gathered the Magicite and had to do all this was because Kamlanot had, like, ulterior motives. At this point in time, like, he and his brother are still working together. That changes. Kamlanot's an idiot. I love him very much. Yeah, spoiler alert, eventually Eldadar will betray Kamlanot too, and he's like, oh, I was just using your power, brother, so that I didn't have to use any of my own. Goodbye, I'm leaving you to die now. And Eldadar just kind
Yeah.
of floats away at a later confrontation. It's really funny. I feel so bad for him.
Yeah. Poor Cammy Nuts.
Oh my god. I've never heard that said before. I did accidentally misspell his name on Twitter once as Coblin Nut, and I've never been able to live it down. Yeah. So that's just, like, the first 5 minutes of the next expansion. Which, mind you, only has, like, an hour and 9 minutes of cutscenes, so it's not much longer than the base game by any means. But this is how it starts. So you go straight from dealing with the Shadow Lord and this really, like, compelling tale of letting go of trauma and, like, okay, you've gotten your vengeance, now you need to find peace, you need to let go of power corrupts, into this, like, epic tale of, like, trying to prevent someone from destroying the world in order to recreate their own civilization. Is this sounding familiar to anybody here?
Not at
Oh,
all.
yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds familiar, but if I may make a note, because I know Kamlanot and Elnarsh from mainly the City Opera Omnia, and Kamlanot is also in the CDNT.
Yep.
And I realized that his theme in particular is very light aligned, from armor to gameplay wise. In fact, in Dissidia he works essentially almost like a paladin.
Yes.
So-
Yeah.
So in that aspect, I'm wondering, because of course it sounds familiar right now to us, the story of the ancients and the Asians. But the fact that they've chosen to go, if they're actually going to rise to the Silhouette and this storyline in Dawntrail, after we have supposedly defeated the Asians and the Dark Designs, tells me a different thing. You know? I'm not sure if I'm
Right.
explaining myself.
Yeah, no, I got you. So there is a reason for that, and I'll kind of explain the Zealard, like, civilization here in a second. I would actually compare them more to the Endless.
Yeah,
than
I'm not
to-
thinking.
Yeah. So, and here's where the fun part of Dawntrail comes in, is because the story of Dawntrail is, like, 1-for-1 Rise of the Zealard. There are a lot of quotes about, like, the Endless and Living Memory, which are just straight up quotes from Eldonarsh. I actually posed this question because I extracted the quotes for my FF11 panel at Gateway and asked people to tell me which game they were from.
Oh, that's evil.
That's like the game in YouTube about, is this
Yeah.
monsters or Pokemon?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had one person in the audience who was like an active 11 fan. Like they recognized me as Nagmalana, and I burst into tears like in the middle of the panel for this. So I
That's-
tears. I was like, oh
that's
my god, someone knows my
wholesome.
name. He was. I love him so much. Anyway, he was just kind of sitting there grinning like a madman when I asked this question because I could tell that the gears were turning in his head about Dawntrail and not the other way around. Here, let me pull up the quotes specifically so that I can.
Because we mentioned before that the Sphere behaves pretty much like Elnarsh before.
Yeah, it's. I can actually. I'm just gonna send you some screenshots real quick from my presentation, Cobb, so that you have something to throw up on screen because there is a specific scene where they're both saying pretty much the same thing, and you can really tell where the concept for Sveen really came from.
Okay.
I'll put this in live chat for you real quick. Like you can see down to like the hair, the parallels that are being made here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
So the quotes are, "Its people lived as gods, never aging, never dying, free from hardships and conflict. Eternal paradise, the land of the gods. Don't you want to be reborn as a god?"
That's
And-
Elnarsh.
Yeah. "And dreamers were consumed by their visions, describing a heavenly city above the clouds, and were drawn to it in droves." So, the Zealarts were these immortal beings. They were people. If it helps in this context, you can kind of think about them in terms of the ancients just for a moment. Because they were immortal. They did eventually pass on. Returning to the crystal is probably a more apt way to talk about it than returning to the star, but like they did recognize life force as energy. What made the Zealart special is that they had a telekinetic connection to each other, not a hive mind, but something that made them unique, something that made them more than. This is where the ancient parallel stops, and we need to start thinking about the endless, because it's basically like a cloud server connection, if that makes sense.
Okay.
You're linked. Yeah. You're like different PC modules that are linked. If
Like the Kala, like the Protoss and the Kala in StarCraft.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to think about it. So it wasn't a hive mind, but it was something that made them fit in. It was something that made them special. It was a sense of community that you would not be able to find elsewhere.
I love that he basically has Sveen's same hairstyle.
Yeah, no, like you can tell in this screen cap, it's hard to tell from a still motion, but they have the same exact animation in these scenes. Each of these screenshots is taken from where they're talking about their plans, and they're like, I recognize that you see life as this, but in order for our lives to, our like civilizations to thrive, we have to take something from you. We don't want to, but we have to. This speech isn't one for one, but they have the same intentions. It's just so fascinating to me. They did it so well. We'll talk about the eye here in a second as well. But that's a pretty good understanding of what the Zealart are, right? The Zealart would eventually evolve. And so the Zealart are still here because they're immortal, right? But they now have mortal counterparts called the Kalu, of which Nagmalana is a part. And I can start talking about him here in a second. But the Kalu weren't immortal, but they had long lifespans in general. They were still a part of society, but because they weren't connected, they also didn't have that telekinetic connection. They were seen as different. So they did kind of develop their own society over time. And they weren't immortal, but they were long-lived. Eventually, Aeneas started getting visions of, hey, our society seems to be dwindling, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want people to be disconnected from this community that we have. We need to do something to bring power back to us. And at that time was when we can start talking about the Lady in the Crystal, Eltana, because the Zealart got their power from this Mother Crystal. Eltana basically ended up splitting the crystal into 5, which is why we have the 5 races in Vana'diel. It's also why there are 5 archangels, one for each race, because there's one for each crystal, and then therefore also one for each sin of mankind. That's neither here nor there. This is just the mechanical way you have of fighting the crystals, essentially. But these visions led Eldonarsh to believe that if the Zealart, him and his brother, reconnected the 5 crystals via the crystal line, which was like these bony structures that look almost like human bone, then they could essentially reformulate the mother crystal in this city called Tulia, which was basically a soul amplifier. They called it the gate. Yeah, we're getting there. This is where the Dawntrail starts peeking through. It's a city above the clouds that isn't actually a city. It's just a conduit for souls as power, because Eldonarsh was lied to. These visions weren't actually visions of eternal paradise. It may have been eternal souls, but you wouldn't have been alive. You would have just been existing in stasis for a different purpose.
Wow, it's living memory.
Yeah, it's living memory. And that's why I get so, like, it frustrates me when people are like, I don't see how the first half of Dawntrail and the second half link together. I'm like, it's just Rise of the Zealart. Like, I was seeing it the whole time. I had made the joke on Mog Talk before the early access started about it. And then we started getting more and more tidbits of it in game. And I was sitting there like, surely they can't actually be doing this. Surely they can't actually be giving this to me. And then I entered living memory, and I was just sitting, I had to sit there for a minute and go, they actually did it. They actually just fully Rise of the Zealart at us. Like, it was impressive. So this is where we can start talking about the rainbows, Meowth, as requested, because this Gate of the Gods, it wasn't actually a city, right? It's a soul amplifier. It looks like a city, but that's not what it functionally is. What it is something that would change what it meant to be alive. And part of the reason that we know this is the avatars of Altana, which is basically the summons, the classical summons from Final Fantasy. Like, there's different types, right? But Ifrit, Garuda, Titan, Bahamut.
Wait, moment. The avatars of Altana, like fragments of her being, are the summons?
No. I wouldn't call them fragments of her being. Servants that she created. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they are bound to her, but they do have a will of their own. They did not want the Gate of the Gods opened, because if they opened the Gate of the Gods, they would cease to have cognition. They would go feral. Basically, their minds would no longer be their own. I'm being intentionally vague about this because we get more details about why this is the case in Chains of Demacia.
Okay. I was asking because in 16, the icons are technically creations, but fragments of Ultima.
Yeah,
though
it's not the same.
Not the same, but it kind of reminded me. That's why I asked for clarification.
Yeah. So it's not the same because the summons, we call them avatars for a reason, is because they are their own person.
Okay.
They are bound to the goddess. They are her creations, but they aren't like pieces of her per se. They are like her lieutenants, if you want to think about it that way.
Okay.
Yeah. Fun. This is also where this becomes relevant in Promathia, but we can talk about this now because the rainbows are associated with like the dawning of a new day, but specifically in the context of like the rebirth of a soul is the easiest way to kind of explain it. This is something that Carbuncle brings up because that's like the avatar of rainbows. The Carbuncle is also the person that the Kalu made a pact with many years ago in order to try and stop the Zealart, because the reason that there weren't that many of them left is because the Kulu, they stopped this initial attempt to rejoin the crystal line. Rejoin was the wrong word in 14 context. I realize we just kind of skipped the Rise of the Zealart here, but basically, way back in the day, when Eldonarsh and Kamlanot first tried to do this, the Kalu stopped them by making a pact with the avatars to kind of take over one of these crystals that they were trying to reconnect. It resulted in a huge explosion, and the demise of many Zealart, and the Kalu eventually went into hiding and like cryostasis, and now they're all kind of like coming out of hiding again. Like they reawaken after Zealart because, you know, taking down Tulia the soul amplifying city, it reawoke Bahamut, which is one of the avatars that they made a pact with. So a lot of this happened like back in time, and then Rise of the Zealot is like us just stopping them from doing it again. The point where Ealdonarsh betrays Comlanot is when they finally power up Tulia to get it to like activate so that they can go back to this city and try to actually enact their plan. Comlanot basically fights you using all of his power, which is powered by this crystal, because that's kind of where the Zealot get their power from. And Ealdonarsh is like, okay, you charged at the crystal, and you kind of defeated my enemies. I'll see you later. Goodbye. Hope you die. And then he, like, fucks off to Leah and leaves his brother for death. It's really tragic in-game. It's, like, this whole thing where Comlanot is asking his brother to help him, because, like, if they had helped him, like, there would be nothing left of us to stand in their way. But Ealdonarsh just kind of leaves and invites us to go along with him. He's like, don't you want to live in endless paradise? Again, the phrasing there is so specific. But you do eventually defeat him. In his final fight, you do see his eye activate like that. It's just, you know, eye symbology. We've talked about it a lot on LoreLines at this point, I think. Did I miss anything Rise of the Zealot story recap-wise, Arden? This one's hard to explain because it's mostly just context.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the majority of the Rise of the Zealot, like, as a player, is just collecting all those fucking crystals off of the headstones. Which like, I feel could be relevant. Yeah. I feel like it could be relevant in some way going forward. Because crystals, duh.
Yeah.
And also, like, the tablets in Dawntrail made me think of those crystals. I don't know if I'm the only one.
No, you are. This is some... Yeah, I totally forgot to bring this up. Let me find the screenshot of it.
It actually very much reminded me of how Crystal Towers Unlock used to be.
Oh
yeah,
God,
that too.
No!
Yeah.
No!
it like I was doing it in 11 and I got to the Zeta Sanctuary and I was like, this feels like I'm trying to unlock Crystal Tower with this similar amount of time investment for I don't know what I'm gonna get for this, but there's story behind it, so I'm gonna do it.
I forgot to mention that there's literally like an AI even while at that point in time when you collect the crystals, Arden.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So basically, your giant fetch quest in Rise of the Zealot is you go get these small crystals in order to unlock the tower and actually get the exposition that I just gave to you. And the way that you do that is you get these 6 glowing stones, and I've put another screenshot in chat for you, Cobb.
Okay.
And you place them on pedestals in this exact order with this exact glow pattern that you use to access Tulia, as seen when Zeralja does it, because this is the best screen cap that we have of it.
Right.
And what this does is unlocks like a mildly sentient apparition of one of the Kalu priestesses, whose name is Eva Nawal. She's like Altana's like best priestess, because the Kalu are the ones who like actually like follow Altana. That's not super relevant at this point
I have
in time,
a legitimately serious question.
Yes.
Is this screenshot from 11 or 14? Because I
14.
cannot tell. Okay.
It's from 14. Yeah, no. Like they were hammering the Zealot stuff home so much in Dawntrail, and it was like right under everyone's noses. I guarantee you there's less than 100 people who actually picked up on this, like in Dawntrail. Yeah, but I got that screenshot and I was like, this is okay. At that point in time, I was like, okay, they are actually doing it. But this is like a mildly sentient version of Evenwall who's stored inside of this fucking computer who awakens to give you all of this backstory and tell you exactly why you need to stop it. Again, she's just fucking stored in the cloud.
So basically Kakiwa.
Yeah, pretty much. Except that's mildly insulting to Kafkia, because every time Evenwall showed up, I got so annoyed. I was like, not this again. Evenwall also just, for the longest time, I refused to learn her name because she made me so mad. that I just called her the Princess Leia looking lady because
Oh
she just.
my god!
I mean, you understand, right? Hold on, I have a screenshot of her at the ready as well somewhere. This is a whole thing. She looks so Princess Leia like. These are all my own screenshots, by the way. Here, I'll put this in live chat for you as well. Look at this. Is this not the most Princess Leia looking outfit that you could possibly have imagined in FF11?
Yeah, that's Padme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when I took one of my friends through 11 back in like 2014, that chick appeared and he was immediately like, Padme Amidala, what are you doing here?
Don't like it. Don't like sand. It's coarse. It's rough and gets everywhere.
I fully agree. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that dialogue.
So this woman is a priestess of Altana, then.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of
Better
stuff
than a
is off the
priestess of a
nose here.
loon. Hey.
Damn. Okay. I completely forgot about that art. Thank you for reminding me, because that's the other one of those things where they were like, oh, they've straight up just put this in 14. Like, they weren't subtle about it at all.
Yeah, like when Galul Jaja first gave us the tablets, I was eyeing the crystals, I was like, these colors and stuff seem kind of familiar.
Yeah.
And then it just kept going.
They didn't stop. I'm so glad you had a similar experience, because I thought I was going insane. I thought that this was just me being me, but no, they fully just did it.
That experience sounds from different reasons like mine, because I kept going into early Dawntrail in the wild, seeing the monsters, and suddenly had the jump scare of a Final Fantasy 13 monster. Like, oh, okay. Then again, whoa, another one. Then another one. And I was like, are they actually doing this to me?
Yeah.
Putting all these monsters of Final Fantasy 13 to me? And then
is-
the second half happens, and I was like, are they actually going into Final Fantasy 13 here?
Oh, and the fun part about this Meowth is 13 got those models from 11 for the exact same reasons. Like, every mob that you see in 14, they're just taking it from 11.
Yep.
And the specific ones that you fixate on for 13, they come from a very specific area in 11 as well, which is relevant to 13's story.
Okay.
So that is where they got it from. It's all
Cobb.
Final Fantasy 11.
Cobb, do you have the means to play a YouTube video right quick?
Yeah, I do.
All right,
which
this
one do
timestamp, because people were asking what
Oh.
the 11 equivalent looks like.
Of the throne room?
Of the crystal
Oh, okay,
part.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So this
Let
is
me-
also
I'm going to play it with sound.
Sure.
Yeah. Do these glows look familiar to anybody?
Mm-hmm.
So you place all of the rocks in the thing.
Oh, it even has a light and dark. That's the only
Yep.
difference, is there's a light and dark one.
Yeah, and
Man.
that's for something we'll talk about later that they haven't done in 14 yet.
So I literally have all of these stones now. I just need to go to the tower and do this. Like, this is where I am in 11.
No, it doesn't. It has in I'm comparing to the screenshot, because there's 7 tablets here, but in the cutscene in 11 there are 8.
Yeah.
So
we'll get to
we're
that.
actually missing dark in this one.
Correct. We'll get to that.
Just dark.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot they summoned like a whole Cthulhu council to have this conversation. But even while basically like led this group of priestesses. There's also no spoken word in FF11, with the
Yep.
exception of the intro cutscene and the single time that they play Memoro della Stono Distant Worlds at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so they're the servants of the liar. basically.
Yes.
God.
And
So it's-
keep in mind the association of Altano with the concept of a dawn, because that
Okay.
has like a metaphysical meaning.
Well, it's
Yeah.
a good thing Zeed's there with us because Zeed
Yeah.
is awesome, and he's basically like, fuck everything, I'm gonna do my own thing.
Yeah, and I mean, he should, because his whole thing is like, I know what happened to Raugrim. I know the truth of this. Why should I listen to anybody in a position of political authority?
Right.
Yeah. And you can pause here, because this
Okay.
is quite a long thing that is
So,
mostly just
Are
what we've
these
already talked about.
are these ladies actually lying to us in here, or it's just
No.
okay?
So they're telling the truth. There's nobody who's ever actually like explicitly telling you a lie outside of like the political figures who are doing it because they're villains. They just don't have the whole truth of it, because Altana is their
Okay.
goddess, and she did do all of these wonderful things. But it becomes more fucked up as the context of the game continues.
Okay.
Yeah, starting with the next bit, because Rise of the Zealot, these events awaken Bahamut. And the reason that Bahamut is awakened is because one of the pacts that were made by the Kalu with avatars was to stop the spread of emptiness, which has now been hastened by the events of the base game and the events of Zealot. This is where I'll bring the FF16 comparison back into play, because the emptiness is best described as like the ether sickness that pervades the land in Final Fantasy 16.
Yeah,
It's just kind of all
Yeah.
encroaching, all
The
consuming.
Akashic. The Akashic.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
why I'm really concerned that there's monsters of the empty up on the moon in 14.
Yeah, this is a whole thing. This is also where we get to talk about Primivians, which, God, I hope Primivian is the next deep dungeon. I would.
Me too. Me too. I
Oh.
need it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool. We'll talk about it when it becomes relevant. So the emptiness starts spreading, and we find this out because a man named Tenzin arrives from the Far East to tell us about it.
Oh my god.
I am not a fan of Tenzin in 11 because he cannot make a decision to save his life. He's well written for that reason, but he pisses me off so much because the reason he comes to Vana'diel from the Far East, we never actually get any more details about his homeland. We never go there. Unfortunately, I do have to keep calling it by these outdated terms. I'm sorry about that. But the emptiness has mostly taken hold over there, and now it's coming to Vana'diel, and he's like coming here to try and find a way to stop it. One of the things that he comes to Vana'diel armed with is the Phoenix Blade. The Phoenix being another avatar of Altana, but the Phoenix has to be powered by human life. So when the emptiness started encroaching on the Far East, they sacrificed most of their people to power up this godforsaken sword that he never draws, and because when he draws it, it unleashes the power, and he draws it in the stupidest possible scenario that he could. And he's like, I'm a horrible leader, I don't deserve to rule. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, that's correct, you're an idiot. And he goes, oh, but I have to try my best anyway, and it's resolved. And I'm like, no, I don't like him. He bothers me.
He is a shonen protagonist in all the worst ways.
Yeah, and he keeps flip-flopping sides, and like we could have saved so much time and like saved so many lives in Chains of Prometheus if we didn't have to keep dealing with him running off doing his own thing and trying to fight us every other cutscene. It's
Imagine how
terrible.
pissed off everyone would have been if that was like the way Wuklamat was written.
Oh my
Yeah,
god.
right. I'm so glad you brought that up, because the like criticisms people have of Wuklamat, I'm like, no, you're thinking of Tenzin from Final Fantasy XI.
Yeah,
Wuklamat is
literally.
perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not relevant. I promise I'm not going to bash
mean,
on
at
Tenzin
least-
anymore.
At least Lamont has not powered up her axe with the lives of their people.
Yeah, and then just wastes it, like actively wastes. Anyway, I'm not gonna character bash on him anymore. He's well written, like he's well written because he's pathetic, but it
So
does piss
angry.
me off. Yeah, I'm upset because I have to compare him to Ardbert later, and I need you to keep in mind that I'm doing it against my will.
And
Speaking of
one of the
axes.
things with Tenzin is like he pisses everyone off because he's well written.
Yeah, it's important to note that, like, he's the real villain of Probathia.
I
He
mean,
has more boss fights
mean-
than any of the like villains they actually
Yeah.
proposed, because you have to keep fighting him. Most of the instances are versions of Tenzin. One of them, he has these like Taru triplets helping him, and if you take too long in the fight, they kill you by casting Meteor. Because these 8-year-old triplets are capable of casting Meteor both intentionally and accidentally, and it happens a lot.
Did you know they're trusts as well?
They are, yeah.
Yeah, and if you
they
have all three of them together, they will cast Meteor on your
Yes.
foes.
Yes.
So good.
God, we'll talk about the Chepakis in a bit. Their whole shine spiel is great.
I feel like it's needed to draw points now that we mentioned character written narrative. There's a difference between making a character that's so annoying because you try to make them virtuous and the result is a bunch of hypocrisy, and you have to differentiate between an annoying character that their purpose is actually to be annoying.
Right.
That's the difference.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Tenzin comes across as both, which makes the writing even better. It's just no, I can't describe to you enough my hatred for this man. I need to move on, or we'll just keep bashing on him, and I don't want to character bash.
I'm actually reminded a lot of Hope from 13, who's incredibly well written, but the way he's presented is not favorable to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But the difference is that the evolution. Hope is a constant evolution.
Right.
But does not get better.
But yeah,
But of course, we're
another
presented in
topic.
the worst moment.
Yeah.
But, a couple of comments in chat. Isn't the emptiness a thing in Neverending Story 2? And so 14 Tenzin is better in comparison to 11 Tenzin.
Oh, I don't know what Neverending Story is, so
That's
I
fine.
can't comment on that. But 100%.
All right, we're gonna have a
My
movie night.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Real.
Yeah.
Even I have watched Neverending Story, and I'm not exactly a film person.
I'm not either.
Okay, we need to dump our childhood trauma on you. So when's movie
Oh
night?
God. Oh Jesus.
Man. That's like big classic.
Yeah,
I did not grow up on American movies.
That's fair.
It's German, so you have no excuse.
Yeah,
Oh.
my dad grew up on the Danish-German contested border after World War II. I didn't exactly watch a lot of German television either, I'll be honest with you.
Oh my God.
Yeah, a little Aeneas history lesson there.
Oh man.
Oh God, I had barely
I don't know.
started introducing Chains of Probathia. Yeah, so the emptiness is a thing that's happening, and it's being accelerated by the events that we've already experienced. That's basically what we get out of Tenzin showing up. Put him in a back pocket for later, because I will at random points just say, and then Tenzin tries to stop us, and we have to deal with that. Because that happens like every few minutes in Chains of Probathia cutscenes. If you go watch like a cutscene movie on YouTube, you will see what I mean.
Speaking of which, I was gonna ask if we wanted to watch the opening cutscene for Chains of Promathia, and then I realized that is also like 6 or 7 minutes long.
Yeah, the opening cutscene is Bahamut rising from the waters outside of one of these Zealardian structures.
I thought you were gonna say Silver Tear.
Hell. No, Bahamut rises from no.
No, but it is really close to the crescent moon-shaped island.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a reference or something. I genuinely like so much of 14 just comes from 11 in ways that is so hard to describe until it just like comes up like that. It's so
Yeah.
good. Oh, and it's about to get better. So now that we know that the emptiness is a threat, there's basically like a city-state summit now that we're all allies in this to try and figure out what we need to do with it. And in order to uncover like the truth of the emptiness, we get a hint from somebody that we need to go look into the ruins of what used to be the country of Tavnesia, which was wiped out during the Crystal War. Now, Tavnesia, the country, is mostly gone. Like there is a gaping hole in the map, like a crater of where it used to be. But its
Yeah.
people went basically underground to a location in game that is called the Tavnesian Safehold. and only a few smugglers know about it as they transport stuff in and out, and some of the Kalu, which have started to awaken from their slumber.
Wait.
Yep.
It's underground?
Kind of. It's like inside of this like cliff tower thing. It's hard to describe. Let me see if I can just very quickly Google.
Now I'm creeped out because I have been speculating of next expansion having our main city underground.
Yeah. So here is. I'm just gonna grab this from the wiki real quick. So that structure in the distance is like a huge mountain that's overlooking a waterway. This is basically
Ooh.
what remains of Tavnasia.
Probably worth mentioning that the opening cutscene for 11 is probably the basis of this design in Chains of Promathia.
Right, it is. So the opening cutscene of 11, where they start introducing the Crystal War, you're actually watching Tavnasia get destroyed.
Oh,
All I know about
so-
Amnesia is that
Yeah.
is that priest magicite, whatever it's called, the Star of Amnesia. That's all I know about
I've
that.
literally never understood the opening cutscene of 11. I have no idea
That's
what
what
happened.
this is.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
I just didn't get
we
far
find out, we find out from certain sources that shall be revealed later that there is like remnants of Tavnasia thriving inside of this like cave system, the Tavnasian safehold. So we go there to try and get answers, and that's where we run into Prish, who is the most favorite character of the community as a whole in FF11. Like over 22 years, she still holds that top spot in the community. Everyone knows who she is, and she is on the poster for the next patch, which is why we basically have a guarantee that we're going to be getting the Chains of Promathia story in the
Yeah.
Alliance raids, because that's like her fucking thing, and I am thrilled.
Even I know who Prish is, and I haven't even gotten
Yeah.
that far.
Some
I
of
know
the
her
rest,
from the city.
I knew her from the Cydia. She is interesting in the context of the story of the Cydia, as she's the one who gives the warrior of light from Final Fantasy 1 his name.
yes. She's so fascinating. She's gonna be your new best friend. If this was a PG-13 movie and one person was allowed to say fuck, Prish would be the person who got to say it.
Yep.
She
Yes.
is also
That's her.
the only character who does get to swear in the game as well. She does call somebody a bitch, which is
Mhm.
hilarious.
It's
Amazing.
amazing.
It's good. Everybody loves Prish, except for the church, who put her on a pedestal because of who and what she is, but despise her in equal measure because she is basically the key to the emptiness. Prish is one of the few examples of the ageless child trope actually being done well, because they don't make it weird in any sort of romantic context, which is always the problem when this trope comes out. But they do it in a way where she has to really grapple with the fact that like her best friend that she grew up with is like now a 28-year-old woman, and she still looks about 16. She hates it. She resents that. Because Prish at this point in time is like at least 60, I think. I might be messing up that number. I know it's at least 60. She wears a pendant around her neck that was given to her by a cardinal named Mildarian, and basically is told that her existence is the thing that is currently locking Promathia away. That is only part of it. There is an angelic counterpart to that we are introduced to later, but it's easier to explain if we just talk about it now. And that is Celteus, whom I know Cobb has been asking me about for a while. People brought up Celteus in the context of an S rank that was added in Dawntrail because it has a similar wing pattern and uses the model for the second phase of the Hephaestus fight in P8. I don't know if I have an image of Celteus ready, but he is on the cover of the Chains of Promathia box. And he is like the crystal counterpart to... Thank you, Google, for just having images ready for me. Yeah.
Oh, this guy,
He's
yes.
Yeah. So remember how the archangels each came from one of these split crystals representing like each race of Vana'diel as evolution happened? Celteus is basically that, but on like an amalgamous scale. an amalgamous scale. Sorry. So think of him as the angelic representation of the mother crystal itself. So we spend a lot of Promathia hunting him down. And I say that pretty aggressively, but he is just this child that appears one day and nobody knows who he is except for the fact that he's fixated on you, the player character. This is where you start becoming relevant. And on Prish. And on a third character by the name of Nagmalata. So he doesn't get his wings until like the very end. Like he gets the wings immediately prior to the final confrontation with Promathia. Promathia being the god of emptiness. He is known by that name to the people. He's considered a herald of the apocalypse. Like once the emptiness of man reaches a critical state, Promathia will appear and destroy the world. That's basically how the prophecy goes. So for most of the game, you're just chasing this pale child around, thinking that he and Prish together are the key to Promathia, which is true to a certain extent, because there is also a prophecy involving a song. And this is where Memoro della Stono Distant Worlds come in. Because you're basically trying to collect the rest of the verses to summon Promathia. But there are two versions of this prophecy, both very, very similar. One states that only a god can sing the song. And another states that singing the song will summon a god. There is a version where both of these are true. I feel like I've talked about this before. Do any of y'all know what that is?
Yes.
It's that the person who sings the song becomes the god. We figure this out on accident towards the end of Chains of Promathia. But that's basically the plot hooks that we've been set up with, is we're chasing these leads down, we're interacting with all sorts of new NPCs, we're gathering allies, and you're kind of running all over the world collecting plot threads instead of just rocks in really, really hard to reach places. So this is where, like, the FF11 story, everyone says, oh, it really picks up in Chains of Promathia, because that's when they figured out how to do quest objectives that weren't just picking up rocks. That sounds mean to say, but that really is how it's done. We talked about, like, the base game and Zealert cutscenes only being about an hour each. The Chains of Promathia cutscene movie is almost 8 hours long. To give you an idea of the scale of which they really amped it up. And this is also the conclusion of the first full arc.
I have heard that's when the story really takes off, is in Chains.
Yeah, and it's hard to talk about Chains without talking about everything else first. It's like hopping into Endwalker without having played any of the other expansions. It doesn't work.
Got it.
It's like if you played 1.0 in 11, and that's like the mission 1 through 6 in base game 11, and then you skipped everything else and went right into Shadowbringers.
Yeah. But it is hailed as, like, one of everyone's favorite expansions of all time. Like, Chains of Promathia is the Shadowbringers of 11 in terms of, like, community popularity and acclaim. If that makes a lot of sense. Now, I have given you all of the information. Can I talk about Nagmalata, please?
Yes, go.
Great. So, Nagmalata is Kalu. So he was one of the first to start reawakening and reintegrating themselves with society. Nagmalata wanted nothing more than to be Zealard. He wanted that community. He wanted to be a part of that civilization. And for that reason, he and Kamlanot actually got along really, really well. To the point where, knowing who each other were, like being a Zealard and a Kalu, Kamlanot appointed Nagmalata as the ambassador for Juno. Like, prior to the start of the Crystal War. Like, that's how long they've worked together. And up until Kamlanot's defeat, Nagmalata kept working with him, and then also kept going to, like, Kalu meetings and stuff, because that was the community that he was currently a part of. The leader of the Kalu at this point in time being Aeshantarl, that is her Kalu name. She is also known as Cardinal Mildarian in the Tavnasian Church, which is like the storehouse for all of this knowledge. So Prish has had contact with Mildarian and suspects that she may be Kalu, but we don't get confirmation of that until later in the story. Nagmalata basically is positioned as a villain, but he's genuinely also just trying to find a way to stop the emptiness from taking over, because he knows something that the rest of us don't, is that one of the pacts that the Kalu made like thousands and thousands of years ago, was that should the emptiness of man ever reach a certain level, before it reaches critical mass, Bahamut swore an oath to wipe out humanity to protect Vana'diel. Now, Bahamut and Nagmalata share a very special bond. They have been closest companions for over 10,000 years. There is a romantic reading of this, and it's one that I am choosing to read into because there's just no other way to describe closest companions than in that way. All of Heaven's Word, just look at these two. I'm dead serious because the way that they made contact with this pact in the first place is that Nagmalata and Bahamut have been close prior to the pact being made. Like, they fought together on the front lines on, like, multiple, like, wars. Years and years and years before the Crystal War. They have known each other on the battlefield. I'm just saying that creates a certain attachment.
I mean,
I mean,
when it comes to Bahamut, you have Fang, you have Dion, and I think it's almost quite self-explanatory.
If you think about to biblically know someone, but also think about Shiva and Hraesvelgr. Like that's
it's the way I describe this relationship is that Nagmalata and Bahamut fucking sprinted at the speed of light so that Shiva and Hraesvelgr could walk and Dion and Terrence could run. Like that's the point that I have to keep making. Because their relationship kind of led to peace between humanity and dragons. Like they kind of were the forefront of that, and they were successful. It's not until the events of Chains of Promathia that rift happens again, and that rift happens again because Nagmalata dies at the end of it, and Bahamut is fucking pissed about it. Like, I'm serious. This is... Oh, God.
You're crying.
I love them so much. I am about to, because the way that we actually get to talk to Bahamut for the first time is also when Nagmalata and Bahamut reunite for the first time since Nagmalata has reawoken. Because we go get Prish, we start learning things about the song, we realize that the song is actually incredibly relevant to our goal during Chains of Promathia. And the Avatars and the Kalu are the only people who are aware of this prophecy of these words alongside what remains of the Tabnasian priesthood. So we go search out Bahamut, which is incredibly stupid because he's angry that he was awoken from his slumber. He doesn't want to have to destroy humanity. He knows that he has to because he's bound to Altana and he made a pact with the Kalu, but he cares about humanity. He doesn't really want to do it. He'll do it, but he's pissed about it the whole time. That he's kind of bound by this oath. And so we go search him out for answers, and that's when we kind of are told that he made this pact. But he starts singing the song to kind of prove his point, because the Avatars are perceived as gods. He doesn't finish it, but he starts singing some of the verses, and then Nagmalata, who's been watching this whole fucking thing, starts singing the rest of the verse, finishing it up for Bahamut, and that's their, like, reunion, is singing this fucking song together. And then having a really heartfelt moment of, like, damn, I've missed you. It's been so long. I am so joyous at our reunion. Now I'm crying. I care about this so much. I care about this so much. I'm so passionate about this. And that's where we kind of get a lot of the story from it. This is also where Tenzin decides that he doesn't like the answer he's been giving, so he fucks off and we have to chase him down and deal with him for a little bit.
You hate him so much.
I do. Well, it's like, we just had this moment and then Tenzin's like, I don't like listening to this. I'm gonna leave. And we're like, but my guy, you promised to help us deal with this. And
my guy.
Yeah, my guy.
Maybe he had to go deal with his homoerotic feelings.
Yeah.
Okay, down, Arden.
Mans was confronted with being gay for the first time and didn't know how to handle it. I don't know. It just bothers me.
I was when not perhaps it's not a 1-to-1, but the thing about being longest companions reunited. I mean, it gives me the Asm and Emetzog vibes, but I'm not sure. I would have to know more as to say a definite thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't make that comparison just yet for a reason that will become apparent.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. I say it gives me the vibes because
Right.
I'm not so familiar with the story of 11. I wouldn't be so bold as to say no. This is a 1-to-1. No, I don't do that.
No, yeah. It's there's a lot of themes that are just consistent across Final Fantasy, and this is very much one of them. Is like long lost companions finding each other again
Yeah,
and
well, of
having a
course.
tragic end, right? So we learn more at this point in time, and then we have to go into. Is this the point where we start going into the Prometheans, Arden? I super got sidetracked thinking about Nagbalada. I'm gonna be totally
I'll
we
bring
going-
up the
are we-
wiki real quick, but yeah, they're
Yeah.
pretty early.
Yeah,
Are we going into Prometheans or are we going into Cognition? Because that one is really interesting to me.
well, they're relevant.
Okay.
So the Prometheans are like, how do I describe this? It's an underground kind of area, but it's places where the emptiness has already taken hold, and they reused some of the architecture from the Prometheans in Elpis. Very specifically, the structures on the River Leith are the exact structures that house what's essentially a memory cell of humanity in the Prometheans.
Yeah. We actually could have touched on the Prometheans earlier. They're mission 1-3.
Oh gosh. Well, it's the Prometheans aren't where they happen isn't the important part, because what they do, you essentially go in and you're hunting for memories.
Yeah.
The phrase "living memory" is also tossed around a little bit in there.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, if we can bring up a visual of a Promethean, I think that might be better to kind of describe what's going on. Yeah, here's a good one.
Okay.
Because it's like this terrifyingly lit space of emptiness. It very much is supposed to give you an idea of what awaits Vana'diel if we don't succeed. This is one
I
of
like that. I like that they always show like Juno for that too.
Yeah. Yeah, so the architecture is meant to be reminiscent of like actual structures in Vana'diel as well, specifically the stuff that was inspired by the Seal Art, because this was a threat that they faced and didn't know about. Remember when I said that Eildenarsh's visions were a lie, that he wasn't actually going to be bringing back his like people to glory? That's the wrong phrase. Wasn't actually going to bring back paradise for all of the people on Vana'diel.
Mm-hmm.
It was Promathia who was seeding these thoughts in order to gain power.
Mm-hmm.
And the Prometheans are emblematic of that. So you're basically going and collecting the truth of that from the Prometheans. I also think that the Prometheans would make a really good deep dungeon, because it was set up as a structure of floors where you had to enter like 3 or 4 different Prometheans and like take these memory cells down further into the structure, and then enter an area with a final boss. Some enemies you want to avoid. The whole thing is basically structured like a deep dungeon in 14.
Nice. And see, here I thought Deep Dungeon came from the Chrysler building in Parasite Eve. It was basically the same thing.
Shut up.
Honestly, yeah.
Deep Dungeon actually came from Tactics Ogre, because that's a thing in Tactics Ogre, but maybe they combine 2 things actually. And that's possible.
Right, but it's a game mechanic of like constantly descending into a location. It happens pretty often, right? I just think that
It's in other games too.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. But it's, as far as like in 14 terms, calling this a deep dungeon is probably the best way to explain it. It was mandatory for story reasons. That structure in the foreground, that is the building that also got used on the River Leith in Elpis. I'm actually in game trying to fly to it right now so that I can kind of give y'all a second visual to compare to. But that structure, it houses a memory unit that you have to destroy in order to proceed further into the Promethean. Which, you know, it's fun that they reuse the structure on the River Leith, which is a river famous for being the thing that, like, in Greece would wipe your memory, right?
The river of forgetfulness.
Yeah.
I'd also like to
literally
mention
wiped
that
my memory.
the aesthetic of Promethean is very similar to Eureka Orthos's Deepest Floors and Final Fantasy XVI's Fallen Architecture.
Yep. Here, I just flew to it in game so that y'all could kind of see. They really did just pull it in. It's very cool. And this is just one of those Easter egg things that I don't think bears too much comparison, other than the fact that they use them symbolically the same way.
Ah.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that the place where we corner Meteon?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't want to compare the emptiness to Dynamis too much because it's a different kind of etherophysical reaction. If that makes sense, emptiness is something that corrodes away at life itself, while Dynamis is a very specific kind of physical reaction. They are similar in theme, but not premise. If that makes sense
do you
for everybody.
think that the emptiness is analogous to that third force we don't know about in 14?
No, because it has too much of like a physical reaction on the world. I would think of it as like an actual absence of life rather than anything else. Think of it as like a true void. Yeah, anti-life.
At least as far as we know in Chains of Prometheia.
Right. Yeah.
Emptiness gets vastly expanded on once you hit Rhapsodies of Vana'diel.
I'm trying to set this up so that I can do the reveal the same way it happens in game. So many people are never going to play the game, and I need them to understand how the reveal was so good. It was so good, Arden. I think I messaged you at like 4 a.m. in tears when I got there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the whole thing.
But one thing, if the emptiness would be the absence of, in this case, let's say, Ether, Dynamis, and the third mysterious force, because in 14 right now we're working in triads, so it makes sense that it would be Ether, Dynamis, and something else. I posit that it's actually willpower, but this is just my theory, okay? But if the emptiness is the absence of the thing, doesn't, like, the closest thing to the proper concept of emptiness right now that I can think in 14 is the empty of the flow of light, because it's literally called the empty.
Yes, and you could compare it to that. That's exactly it. It's the absence of like any sort of anything that could create life. Like it eats away at it. That's really good.
But then that would tie everything, all of this, with the light.
I know where else is going with this.
Yeah. It's put a pin in that. Put a pin in that.
Already's holy gem.
Yeah, put a pin in that. Put a pin. I promise. I promise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Where was I story-wise? At this point in time, we do kind of go on a little bit of a wild goose chase to wrap up the rest of our threads before we actually find out where we need to go. Something fun that I want to mention before we get into like the heaviness of finishing Chains of Prometheia is these triplets, right? The Chebeki triplets, the Tarutaru. They're all toddlers. They can cast Meteor, and they don't seem to understand why that's a big deal. They're on a quest to find their dad this entire time. So a lot of these like serious quests have interludes where like they break into random people's houses and accuse them of being their father, completely disrupting this person's entire life, and then deciding that they can't be their dad, they're too much of a bitch, and then they go on to the next victim. This happens everywhere we go. At some point in time, these triplets decide that Tenzin can be their adoptive father, if nothing else, for a very brief point in time. This leads to a fight with Tenzin on an airship where we are fighting him and the Chebekis are helping him. You're not actually fighting the children, but like they heal him on the sidelines, they cast supporting spells, and if you take too long, they kill you from the sidelines. You cannot target the children, they are simply just menaces. They do this to Nagmalata too at one point. And then there is another point in time where people realize that Nagmalata has kind of started acting on his own because he has kind of figured out what's going on. Not fully, but to the point where he no longer trusts the Kalu that he's working with. He doesn't really trust you because he was trying to help you at some point until he thought that you were, like, accidentally trying to speed the emptiness along as well. He doesn't really get positioned as a villain. However, there is a fight where the Chabakis are attempting to assist him. This isn't an instance, this is a cutscene. Where Moldarian basically is trying to stop him from doing something. And the Chabakis show up, and last we saw they were working with Nagmalata, so we assume that they're there to beat the shit out of her. And she basically gives them some sort of signal and teleports him very far away. The Chabakis just kind of send him into the abyss, banishing him to the Shadow Realm on the other side of Vana'diel, so that he stops being a problem for 5 minutes. It's one of the funniest betrayal scenes because it has absolutely no consequence other than Nagmalata isn't there for 30 minutes. But it's absolutely hilarious that the Chabakis at any point in time will betray you if they think that you're no longer their father. This is a running joke.
It's so good.
It's framed as an episode of Maori. It's you're not my father, casts meteor on you and runs away.
Yeah.
It happens.
I love
so
the
much.
Windurst branch because when they're talking to Yorin Orin and Korumoru, and the speech quirks that those two have make it just so much funnier too.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's worth going through the Promathia site, the Promathia quests just for them. Even if you don't care about the grander things in the story. I hope that they put the Chabakis in the Alliance raids just on the sidelines yelling at you, because I think that would be incredibly funny. I would love for that to happen.
Okay, no joke. I was thinking that the Chabuki triplets might actually end up being one of the quote unquote trash packs or mini bosses between bosses in the Alliance raid.
Yeah, the thing is they're 8 and the game doesn't want you hurting children. I understand. I also feel that way, but this would be something where we put them on the sidelines. It's why one of my ideal scenarios is that we fight all the archangels at once, and then 2 of them at any point in time cycle out on the sidelines and then take aggro and then start doing arena stuff when it's not their turn to be targetable in the arena.
So basically the red chocobo in Ravenaster that shows up, casts Choco Meteor and flies away.
Yes. Actually, that would be great. Yeah. I want that to be what the Chabaki triplets do. That's perfect. Oh god. I can go straight into the Promathia fight, because that's kind of where stuff culminates. One of the hardest fights in the game is actually a sequence where everything kind of starts coming to a head, where Bahamut is forced to start his raising of Vana'diel, and we go try to stop him instead of dealing with the emptiness. This pisses Nagmalata off, because you're planning to kill Bahamut. Why would you do that? He loves him. That's not cool. That's not chill. You're no longer fighting for the same side. But also because he's no, we can still stop this. Why are you trying to get sidetracked when we can't actually just stop Promathia from getting summoned in the first place? Your priorities are in the wrong place. So you have a fight in an airship against Nagmalata and Bahamut, essentially. This is one of the funniest and strangest fights, because you start off pretty normal. You fight some ninjas, right? You just fight some Kulu ninjas. That's pretty great. It's pretty chill. You have a cutscene sequence. Then you fight the Ultima weapon. And then you have another cutscene sequence. It's pretty chill. It's pretty good. And then you fight the fucking Omega weapon. And at this point in time, Bahamut is I've had enough. I'm going to blast you out of the sky. This is insane. Why are we doing this? The whole fight is just a whole bunch of political nonsense. It's we could all be focusing our energy on actually stopping the threat. Instead, we're infighting. This is the point where Tenzin decides to draw his Phoenix Blade in order to attack Bahamut. Bahamut says, "Why are you doing this?" and just knocks the airship out of the sky. And all of that power of the Phoenix Blade is gone, and Tenzin has a crisis over this. So we spend a series of quests trying to cheer him up so that he's actually able to go to the final confrontation with us. It's a whole thing. This used to be considered the hardest fight in the game because of the sheer time it would take to get through it. It was actually to the point where if you were watching the cutscenes, even as quickly as possible, you would not have the time to actually complete the combat sequences in the game. Yeah. It's also rare that you get boss gauntlets like this with multiple bosses in 11. Most instances are a single boss, or like just trash mobs and you're running through a cave system. Having like something Praetorian style was not a thing in 11. They also did not really do it again after this for this reason, because people were like having to skip all of this like critical story stuff, and then you wake up on the ground and Tenzin is moping and you're like, what now? Yeah. This is one of the funnier sequences in the game. What else can we talk about before we get to the...
Diablos.
Oh yeah, Diabolos! Fuck! How could I forget about Diabolos? So Diabolos is another avatar of Altana. His domain is dreams. He can just create new realities in dreams. So his solution to everything that's happening with the apocalypse is just come live inside my dream and everything will be fine.
Sounds legit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
And that fight also really sucked because who's familiar with Eden's Cloud of Darkness?
Yeah, specifically the Savage version.
Yeah. Who would like to get dropped off of one of those platforms and then into a pit of spiders?
Not me.
Nope, I'm good.
Well, that's what happens if you fuck up the Diabolos fight. Have fun.
I mean, I don't mind spiders, but
It was just such an annoying fight because, like, if you fell off the platform, you were fucked. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Nowadays, you can actually run back up on the outside because there are ramps, but back then, when it was level capped and stuff, you were just dead because the dire mites would just one-shot you.
Yeah, it was a tough fight for that reason. You might as well have just fallen off a tile into the abyss. This is interesting because this dream world was kind of where Celteus was hiding out for a very long time, trying to like figure out what his role in defeating Promathia was going to be. Because for a very long time we thought that he was the enemy. He's not. And Diabolos is also one of the avatars who's just trying to like help us through everything in his own way, misguided as it is. This is a good time to talk about the sky over Juno in the cutscene or the screenshot that we got for the Alliance raids, because there is a type of, I don't necessarily want to call it endgame content, but it's one of the closest things we have to raid content in 11. It's called Dynamis. Yeah, so it's not Dynamis, the etherophysical like concept of physics that we have in 14, but it is where they got the word. Dynamis is the dream world reality that Diabolos can create. So the way that they set up this stuff is you enter a dream reality and fight harder versions of all of the bosses. That's the mechanical function of it. But it is something that you just have to grapple with in the story of the game, that it's not just like, oh, here's an in-universe explanation for having a harder version of content. Diabolos can just do that. And he chooses to do it very, very selectively. It's terrifying. The sky over Juno in that screenshot is the sky in these dream realities.
okay, that's not at all concerning.
Yeah. So
I'd also like to mention the quirk of Dynamis. The way you would enter it originally was you would use a timeless hourglass or a perpetual hourglass. It's now the prismatic hourglass, but to extend your time inside the dream realm, you needed like sands of time, which I thought was an interesting way for them to do it.
Yeah, it gets interesting when we get the context of Wings of the Goddess as well, because it kind of explains why the avatars have these weird abilities as well.
So, sorry. I know I'm kind of interrupting, raising my hands, but so let me see if I got it correctly. This Dynamis dream realm is basically a reality made from someone else's dreams and perception or whatever. That's actually connected somehow to time.
Kind of.
Did I got it right?
It's not from someone's dreams. It is a dream that Diabolos is having and sustaining people inside. Think about like the Hunter's dream in Bloodborne. Yeah.
Or like living memory, if all of that was a dream instead of the
Right.
cloud.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good way to think about it, because it's not like a reality in and of itself, but it is a place where you can live out your life.
Sure is a whole lot
Or
of
on
Penacony.
life as it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
living memory is a dream of sorts. It's just a waking dream. It's not
Yeah.
reality,
It's a
but
nightmare.
yeah, but that's the thing, and it reminds me the concept too much. Not sure if Ayumi is going to agree with me with what Orasight does in the perception alteration. Maybe.
Yes, kind of.
So,
Kind of.
Because we've seen how Orasight works in 14. We've seen only in the raids, but we know that it does alter perception to fit the victim's desires and
Kind of.
That's not how the Dynamis functions in
Okay.
11. Yeah, there will be a more apt comparison for this later.
Okay.
Yeah. What's important to note is that this could just mean that what we're doing in the Alliance raids is just a dream world that Bolas has created, and it's not really going to have an impact on 14, which would suck. But would also make sense, because the way that they do the crossover event, Iroha talks about her time in Eorzea being like a dream. She's like, oh, this is your reality, but to me, this is my dream. That's not really something that makes a lot of sense unless you have the context of Dynamis in 11, because that just means that she's like, oh, she recognizes that this is a place that is alive, but also is not to her because she comes from a different world. It's a different kind of way of creating reality in layers. It has no bearing on the outside world, but it does because you can bring those people in.
I mean, there are a bit more concerning implications, but let's not go
There
into
are,
that.
yeah. It's like a pocket dimension is the best way to describe it.
Also, it kind of reminds me. Kind of reminds me of Dissidia, the concept of Dissidia. When the warriors all of the warriors have summoned into the world of Dissidia, they regain their memories of their previous visits to Dissidia, but once they leave, they forget their time in the Dissidia world.
Yeah, I mean, when you enter Dynamis, you still remember it when you leave, but it is very similar to like the concept of being drawn into it. So that's also an important thing that we just get to put a pin in. So it could just mean that like that's our instance that we're dealing with here, or it could be like just a design choice that they made for that area. We do like one Dynamis thing. There's a lot of things that it could mean, but it's there. And it is one of those
sure there.
It sure is there. A lot of FF11 stuff is just, it's there and we can't do anything with it. But that's what it is. Chains of Prometheus is so hard to explain because you have to give context for stuff as you go through. It's hard to do it linearly.
Yeah.
At this point in time, though, I think it's worth going into like the approach to the final combat against Prometheus itself, because you do fight the god eventually, right? Would it really be the end of a Final Fantasy arc if you don't fight God at some point? You know? So, at the end of Rise of the Zealot, one of the things that you need to do in order to actually access Tulia and go to the final confrontation is you need to fight the Archangels. You can either do it one at a time, or you can face all of them at once if you have a special item that you can only get on a full moon in a certain weather condition and go to a certain part of the
that's
lane.
what you were telling me about. Okay.
Yeah, that's called Divine Might. Fighting all of them at once is a lot of fun. But you could also just go around to their different, like, crystal home points in Tulia and fight them individually. There is something similar in Chains of Prometheus when you enter the Garden of Rumet, which is, like, I don't know how else to describe it other than like the seat of Zealot power at that point in time. It's in this beautiful region. Most of Eureka's areas are inspired by this. A lot of the notorious monsters in Eureka come from this area too.
Okay.
I like to explain it as like Amarot, but trippy and very white to people who haven't played 11 but have played 14.
Vaporwave Amarot is probably
that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I'm dead serious. It's called the Sea of Altaio. I can pull up a picture. People used to call it sea because spelling Altaio is a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Why do you keep... Oh, my keyboard is fucking up. I'll tell you. Yeah, I know how to spell it. Stop putting a T in there.
That is not how I
Copy
thought it was going to be
image.
spelled.
Yeah, here you go. Use this image specifically. Because there's a lot in here that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
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 I'll wait for that to kind of be on screen.
All right, give me a sec.
Yeah.
C it's a lot.
It is. So you can kind of see like where they got specifically Hydatos from. This is a region where you're kind of walking on water. There are enemies below you that will ascend, and there are enemies above you that will descend if you walk under their shadow.
Wow.
Those
brutal.
fish that you see floating like at walking level, they will follow you around. They won't hurt you until you do like AoE damage, and then they will start attacking you. But if you're just running around, you're safe from them. They won't follow you into like new regions or what have you. But they are dangerous if you have to start attacking something, because they do like become kind of annoying ads. That's a mechanical thing.
Why does this landscape reminds me of Lakeland?
Right? It's very similar, isn't
Mhm.
it? Yeah. Remember what we've talked about with Lakeland recently and their use of Electrope as far as soul conduit?
Yeah.
This is a soul conduit. The
Oh, great.
architecture of this region is pretty much one for one the same architecture that you see in Origenics when you do that dungeon as well, because it's used for the exact same purpose.
Okay.
The architecture that you see under the water, that is Primivian architecture, so you can kind of see the remains of previous civilization here. And the building at the center, that is the Garden of Rumet. It is a lot larger than it looks on this building here. But inside this garden, you have to go to a different tower depending on which race you are, because you have to receive the blessing of your specific crystal before you go and face Promathia.
That's kind of racist.
Is probably... Yeah, it is.
There's a lot of that.
There is a lot of that, and I'm trying to be as sensitive as I can about it, but that is bluntly the way the mechanic of it works. Fundamentally, what this meant was that like you would either join a party of all Mithra, so you only had to go to one location to do this before you face the final boss, or if you have a party with everybody in it, you could either split up if you were good at dodging, because there was a really like you could go through this whole thing without drawing aggro of dangerous enemies. It was kind of a fun puzzle of when enemies are in a certain state. Like if they're in a ball, they won't aggro you, but if they're out and floating, then they will. There were like totems that you could dodge their line of sight if you're like rotating in the correct direction. So if your party was good at dodging, you could go do this individually and then meet back up at the door that you needed to access the final combat instance in, or you could just bum rush the whole thing as you spend a few hours on that.
Spoiler alert, no one is good at dodging.
Yeah, it's tough. It's an old game.
Yeah. Oh, and also a fun thing, some people would try to sneak and invis past stuff, but inevitably you had that one guy in your alliance who would be like, "Oh yeah, I've learned those spells," forgetting that everything in like Zillart and Chains of Promathia in-game areas also aggro's magic.
Yeah, that's another thing. So you had to use like the sneak powder and that sort of thing, like the actual items. It was really cool. There were multiple ways to solve it.
Question though.
Yes.
What's wrong with this guy in this screenshot?
We'll
Because
get there.
it's scaly, almost like flakes, and there's also this whole thing like light that reminds me too much of one in the near raids when the seed of this resurrection goes up in the sky, then in Dawntrail the Grail going into the gate.
Now let me stop you right there. I'm not talking about this right now because it's going to come up later. This thing in the sky, this is something that happens during the Promathia fight. It's just particle effects. Well, I'll have Cobb move the thing down so you can see why once we get there. But it's not relevant yet, which is why I'm like leaving it on the down low, because it's something worth discussing when we get to the end of it. So, something that we should talk about at this point in time, just because I think it's neat, is we talked a little bit about the archangels and how there's one for each race that we have in Vana'diel, right? What's my best comparison? Where's the one? I think Brandon is the one where it's most relevant. So, this quest that I just described to you, where before you are able to finish this expansion, you have to stop and do what is essentially a side quest in order to get a crystal in order to proceed, the crystal being a form of memory of something, should remind people a whole lot of the Shadowbringers role quests. Cobb, will you go ahead and pop this up on screen and we can kind of talk about it? Because I have one for each of the Crystal Warriors, but I think it would be best just to do one example for the sake of time. I'm sending you a lot of visuals, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
I mean, what would we do without the visuals?
Right, okay. So, on the top left, we have an Archangel. I've already described what they are. Each of them was also associated with a certain emotion. So the one for Galka is Rage. In the final confrontation against Promathia, you also, have one of, at least one, some were, groups, of each race represented in their own story. The one for Galka is Jabos, up in the top right. These two concepts are the basis for Ardbert's party in Final Fantasy XIV, and the cardinal virtues they become, because the archangels represent the individual sins of man. The cardinal virtues are sin eaters who represent the exact same thing, and they use the exact same coloration, the exact same armor patterns, the exact same facial markings. And this is true across the board for every cardinal virtue from the Shadowbringers role quests.
They even have the red eyes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is where they come from. And the original designs for the Crystal Warriors in the final confrontation of Promathia, which are meant to be the redemption of the sins of man that their associated crystal represents, they are the basis for Ardbert's adventuring party. It's scary. It's terrifying. Let me send the one for Taru as well, because that's another one where it's really easy to kind of see the designs. Nielbert is difficult because he's entirely covered up. And here's a picture of the Chebukis as well, because they do join you in the final fight against Promathia. They do attempt to actually help you by casting Meteor again, except they accidentally hit Celteus, and that's the phase change into the second part of the fight. They're like, oh yeah, we can take down God, and then they accidentally attack Celteus, and he needs a minute to recover before we go into the second phase.
So I have to ask, because this is something I know about Wings of the Goddess, and I know we haven't gotten there, but specifically the Walk of Echoes. And since our Alliance raid now is called the First Walk, and Walk of Echoes, from what I understand, is basically failed timelines, do you think that's going to be how they're kind of going to introduce this, where they're going to say, 11 is a failed timeline or 14 is a failed timeline? I don't know how they might present it, but basically that the cardinal virtues here and the original party from 11 are actually the same party, but in different timelines.
I don't think they would do that, mostly because that's not technically how the Walk of Echoes work. It is a place where failed timelines go to be eaten by Atomos. But I wouldn't necessarily call them failed timelines. They are timelines that Altana has deemed unworthy of existence.
Okay.
There is a huge distinction there. The Walk of Echoes isn't also just where those failures go. It's a point where everything meets. We've talked about, at Gateway, we talked about, Alexander being a critical point in our story where stuff starts breaking.
Yep.
I will get to the Walk of Echoes specifically once we beat Promathia, because that's when I can reveal a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay.
Wings of the Goddess is surprisingly easy to explain compared to everything else.
Yeah, which is amazing for a time travel expansion.
Yeah, because it's the time travel is an illusion. It doesn't
Yeah?
yeah, that's why I'm
Yeah?
so much more confident about the multiverse shit in 14 is because they subverted it so well in 11. It's an illusion that the goddess wants you to believe in. I don't like her. She's so mean. Yeah. That's
As
the whole
much
thing.
almost as much as Tenzin.
No, Tenzin's still more my mortal enemy. That's enemy number 1 in
Oh my god.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure which. So every time I hear about Altana, she just keeps reminding me of Ultima more and more and more.
Yeah, we'll get there. There will be a point where it becomes undeniable, but I wanted to get through this first. So that's basically the last thing that you need to do before you can go and confront Promathia is you're collecting these crystals, and that is where we got like the Shadowbringers role quests from. Like thematically, it's so good because you're bringing in your new allies and honoring like people that you've lost. It's very well done, and it's cool to see that they did use these designs again because this isn't something that a lot of people have picked up on. While you're doing this, however, Nagmalata is off discovering the truth about what Promathia actually is. Because we keep talking about Promathia as if it's a god, as if it's the exact counterpart to Altana. That's kind of how the lore of the game presents him initially, right? Like, Hydaelyn had Zodiark. They want you to think about it that way. That's not true. What Nagmalata ends up realizing is that Promathia is also an avatar of Altana, and that all of this was kind of the thing that Promathia was burdened with, was this emptiness of man resulting from the split that Altana herself decreed. This was an intentional result of her actions. This was something that we needed to overcome. And Nagmalata cannot reconcile that. He refuses to believe that man's existence is only for suffering. He refuses to believe this. Like, he flat out denies it. And in that moment of realization, him vocalizing that is what completes the song, and he ends up being somebody who ascends to kind of Zealot status, but in doing so, he also becomes the last soul that Promathia really needed to become manifest. And in doing so, he inadvertently manifests Promathia in the way that we can defeat it and not have to worry about the emptiness being like a godlike status anymore because you've gotten rid of the avatar that's holding on to it. It is such a heart-wrenching moment. I've talked about this on the episode. I think it was the one before we had Crow on as well, because he was running a bit late. So I won't go too much into this again. But
I remember that part. But
yeah. But this is where we can pull up that Altair thing again, because Meowth, this particle effect in the sky should be familiar to you. It's the same fucking thing in the background of Sveen's fight at the end of her phase change, where we were asking about that. There's so much of Vana'diel in that fight. Like, we found ruins of Bastok.
Yes.
Like, different regions. Kufim Island is also seen when the zones change. This thing in the sky, that's what they used for the particle effect and gold in the background of Sveen's area. And it is the manifestation of, like, how do I describe it? Of the Avatar's presence in 11.
Yeah.
But remember, I was talking about how Promathia, the emptiness, was the thing that was actually drawing Eldonarsh in, and how what Eldonarsh did was basically unlock Tulia, which was the living memory equivalent in FF11. This is the thing that seals the deal all the way together. That's such an intentional thing to put in the background of that Sveen fight. Oh, it made me so happy. It did scare the shit out of me as well, because it's like, oh, they really are doing this. We really have to grapple.
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
But that's what that particle effect is. This is something that results from Promathea's like actual manifestation in the world.
Okay, so I don't know exactly how to tackle this with my limited knowledge. But as far as I understand, the whole thing that you mentioned about Nagmolada being like, fuck you, humanity is not just here for suffering to Altana. It just sounds to me almost like a middle finger from someone to the whole decree of Heidelin. If you understand, I
Yes.
don't.
Yeah.
Let's wait.
Someone
which
in chat.
is
No,
which
go
is
on.
something that we have seen brought up because, like, for example, in the infamous Venat cutscene, which is actually not true what the events went down, but let's not go into that. Her decree is that no longer shall man have wings to bear him to paradise, henceforth he shall walk. So she basically cut mankind's wings, so we will stay forever, remain grounded, you know?
Yeah.
Right. In Dawntrail, from the theme song being Open Sky that constantly says spread your wings and fly, which again the theme song for Dawntrail can be deceptive because, again, I'm going to ramble a bit, but there's two different things. One is the true freedom and true knowledge, and the other one is the illusion of freedom and the illusion of knowledge. I think Dawntrail is playing here with the concept of the illusion of freedom and knowledge. But I don't want to go into that right now. But for example, in Arcadium, Eutrope, in just the fact of using Electrope to grow wings, as she declares, if one needs wings, one must simply make them. That's a middle finger to Venat. That's basically saying I don't need the wings. I can regrow my wings. Fuck you. Which to me it reads as mankind being so fed up with this imposition of a higher will that it's like, this is our time to stand against some divine decree imposed onto us, which was imposed on the will of the ancients. Maybe I'm kind of tripping here, but that's the impression that gives me.
It's you're on exactly the right track, because Nagmolada, he's Kalu, right? He exists in the state of wanting to be Zealard. He craves that kind of connection. And part of that is also, it's impossible to discount the fact that avatars are immortal, and he and Bahamut are what they are to each other. At some point, he will die. And, he doesn't want to be separated from that. But simultaneously, he also can't be the person who's like, oh yeah, we should just end everything. He refuses that side as well. He finds that third option, and in doing so, he becomes the sacrifice necessary to make this happen. And that's the thing that gets me, is he's done all of this. You can see so much of all of the best parts that everyone loves of 14 in him, and his name goes forgotten. And I'm on a mission to fucking change that, because if nothing else, he deserves to be remembered for that. And there is someone in chat who actually mentioned Answers. So, fun fact, Answers was written for 1.0, before the concept of restarting 14 into a realm reborn even came into existence. One of the lines in the specific arrangement of Memoria della Stona, which is used for the prophecy in Chains of Promathia, is, I may know the answers, though one question I still hear, what twist of fate has brought us to roads that run so near?
I'm glad we're on the same page, because I linked the lyrics for that in Discord while you were talking.
Yeah, it's Answers is basically Nagmolada's revelation. And the thing that he denies, he flat out says, no, this cannot be true, because otherwise what is the point of living? And again, I cannot speak to the developers. No one talks about this stuff. But Answers, before it was associated with the start of A Realm Reborn, it was composed along the same veins as Distant Worlds. It reads entirely like a sequel. The fact that they chose to restart Final Fantasy XIV into A Realm Reborn with Bahamut ending the world against his will, and that being the thing that Nagmolada strove not to do, and the reason for it being Answers, which is his exact thought process in denying that result of the world. I'm crying about this again because I get so emotional about it. it's what we could have had in Promathia if like Nagmalata
Yeah.
hadn't been there, and it gets me every single time because it's so much of it just goes back to that specific instance and nobody knows about it, and it makes me insane. Yeah, he lived, died, and knew. And in that exact moment, that was when he became the thing that we needed to kill, and he understood that that had to be his fate. He realized his dreams and realized that in order to be everything that he wanted to be, to do everything that he wanted to do the good in the world, he would have to cease to exist. And the fact that his name has been lost to time as a result of that is so poetic, but I cannot let that stand because we owe so much of everything that we love to him specifically. I'm sorry, I'm getting so heated.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
It's
But
okay.
I also would like to point out that Distant Worlds and Answers both have the same singer even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
It's-
Dragon Song and
Kind of.
Revolutions, but
Kind
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing, but it's the same composition team, which it speaks volumes about it, because the original idea for Final Fantasy XIV was to make it a sequel to 11. And again,
Yeah.
I'm entering speculation territory at this exact point in time.
go
But-
ham.
Yeah,
Yeah, go.
if this was supposed to be a direct sequel originally, and the song Answers is in here, there may have been a version of this story where Nagmalata got what he wanted and didn't have to die for it. And I'm actually like openly crying right now. Just the idea of this, if nothing else, I have one very, very humble request of everyone here, of everyone watching, is that if we get him in the Alliance raids, please enjoy him. Because God knows that would be a dream come true for me, genuinely. And I hope his story, he above all else deserves to have his happy ending for once. But my humble request is that if we don't see him, please remember him. Nobody else will. I'm serious.
Remember us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that he once lived.
Please, if nothing else, please. I'm on my hands and knees begging.
I
The-
will
the-
say I really want to see you stream the raid in case he
I
does
will.
show up, just
I
so I
will.
can hear your screams.
Oh yeah, I've gotten so many requests. I will be live that morning. I am
Yes.
taking a PTO day. I will be live pointing out all of the Easter eggs, screaming and crying and generally having a good time.
Speaking of Easter eggs and interesting things, should we talk about some of the interesting quirks of the actual mission that you fight Promathia in?
Oh god.
May I just make a comment before we go into that?
Yeah.
Because the whole thing about Answers and the closing of 1.0 being essentially what Nagmalata tried to prevent tells me something. Maybe I'm tripping here. Tells me something that this is something that to me feels like it should not have happened. If it makes sense what I'm trying to say. Like it's the bad version of what
It's-
happens in 11.
Oh, keep a pin in that. Once Arden goes over the
I'm running out
stuff.
of pins.
I know, but I promise we'll get there. Have faith in me, Al. Have faith. I'll carry you to the finish line. I promise.
I will. Have
Should we start with what the mission's called?
Yes. Will you go over that real quick? I need to grab another drink and like wipe my eyes.
Yeah.
I'll be back in a minute.
So
I-
Promathia mission 8-4, because missions are numbered weirdly in 11. This is the mission where you fight Promathia, and it is simply called Dawn.
Ah,
Part of that, of course, is because Altana is known as the Dawn Goddess, while Promathia is considered like the Dusk God or the Twilight God for most of this mission questline. Now, some of the interesting quirks, aside from the fact that like Prish and Celtius join you in this fight, Promathia's ability names are actually quite interesting. In Promathia's first form, The abilities are called Empty Salvation, Pestilent Penance, Malevolent Blessing, Infernal Deliverance, and then Chains of Apathy, Arrogance, Cowardice, Envy, and Rage after each of the, like, sins of humanity.
I am back. Those are all of the emotions associated with the archangels.
Yeah, emotions.
Yep.
And then also uses Comet, of course, because what Final Fantasy boss doesn't use Meteor Comet? And then in his second form, uses Seal of God, I hate this word. Quiescence.
Yeah, quiescence.
Okay. Yeah.
Quiescence. Winds of Oblivion. Meteor. Bastion of Twilight. And Wheel of Impregnability.
Hmm.
I also grabbed my art books so that I can show you all the representation of Promathia that we get in game as well, because he is immortalized in a statue of a chained angel. Because he is described as an angel in chains the entire time, a beast locked in slumber.
Yeah, which you do see that in, what is it? Hall of the Gods has the
Yes.
broken one, I think.
Yep, that's the time that we see it.
Yeah. Oh, and then another interesting quirk is after you complete the mission where you defeat Promathia, you get to choose a ring, which are the Rajas ring, the Sattva ring, and the Tamas ring. Which Rajas is in Vedanta, the element or mode of Prakriti associated with passion, energy, and movement. Sattva is the quality of goodness, purity, positivity, truth, serenity, balance, peacefulness, and virtuousness. And then Tamas is associated with lethargy, darkness, and ignorance. Which I thought was an interesting quirk, and it kind of ties into some of the themes that they like to play with in 14 as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but in 14 it's different because it's flipped. Because darkness in this context would be the real light, and light would be the real darkness.
Well, it's kind of. So Promathia was basically the dumping ground god for all of the things Eltana was associated with but didn't want.
Yeah.
So you want it. That's why he's considered the Twilight god, is because the darkness on its own, if we're using 14 terms, was fine. It was when it started being combined with all of these things that Eltana realized she fucked up with this avatar, and that it needed to be defeated. Like, it was a form of pollution added to it, if you want to add it that way.
Which is funny because I consider Dawn the same way, because Dawn and Twilight are both just transitionary
and
periods.
We could talk about that here in a second. I do want to send Meowth into a tizzy as well, because I know Meowth likes looking at the lyrics of things. Just think about the song of Promathia, the Twilight God, in the context of going back to all of the songs in Shadowbringers. Sing come twilight, sleep when they die. In the context of angels falling, there is a Promathian reading of Shadowbringers that will DM me when you finish, because it's good. All of the stuff that have confused people about Shadowbringers for a very long time, it's just here. This is where it's coming from, and it's delicious.
So basically, the verse goes like, hindmost devils, early to rise, sing come twilight, sleep when they die. That's the whole.
Heaven's angel. No, it's Heaven's banquet leavened with lies.
What's the next? Heaven's banquet leavened with lies, sating honor, envy, and pride. So, if there is a Promathian read of Shadowbringers, and we are heading into, and in Dawntrail, they're basically hammering us with going back to Shadowbringers, and well, I think it's self-explanatory.
Yeah,
I don't really have to elaborate.
I can like see the synapses forming in your brain right now. And we're gonna skip over Adergon very briefly, because once I talk about Adergon, a lot of stuff is gonna start making sense.
Isn't Adergon the Alexander one?
Yes, but we'll
Okay.
get there. Because this is a really good segue into Wings of the Goddess. Because Arden, do you remember the last thing that happens when you defeat Promathia?
Oh, it's been years.
Altana cries.
Oh, right, which is why you get her fucking tear as a key item.
Yeah. Yep. Altana cries. And at this point in time, you think it's just a thematic thing. Before like you've finished it. The goddess is crying. You've completed the expansion. Good job. This in hindsight becomes very, very sinister because in Wings of the Goddess, you find out that the tears of the goddess actually creates agents in order to correct the timeline. The original version of this fight, you were not supposed to win. In the quote-unquote correct version of events here, you lose. Everybody is wiped out except Prish, and emptiness starts to consume all of Vana'diel. The goddess crying is her consigning that version of events to the Walk of Echoes to be consumed by Atomos, the Time Eater. This is not the first time this has happened, because during the Crystal War, you win, right? The Shadow Lord is defeated and locked in slumber. Wrong. We are living in a reality that the goddess has decided to create as an illusion, because in the original actual version of the events, the world is consumed by the darkness of the corrupting power which took over Raugrim and created the Shadow Lord. You've been living a lie created by the goddess this entire time. This is a whole thing. Yeah. We're gonna kill the elf. The whole...
There goes me elf.
Yeah. And this, I'm genuinely just gonna glaze over this because a lot of this is just one for one. I can tell you what happens. The Atomos eats like realities and souls of things that were not supposed to exist. The entire plot of Wings of the Goddess is your friend for that expansion. Her name is Lilithset. In another timeline, taking the name Lilith, trying to merge realities a la a rejoining. And in order to do so, she's basically trying to feed this illusion to Atomos instead of her own. So it's a war of whichever one is going to win out. One of the things that happens here is that Lilithset, her memories, her existence, gets scattered and eaten by Atomos. Her body basically dissolves into orbs that float up into the sky and get used for fuel. Does this sound very, very similar to anything that happens in Dawntrail when we're talking about souls and memories?
Yes.
Yeah, that's basically where that comes from. We've talked a lot about souls being eggs.
That also sounds
yeah.
a lot like what Elidibus did in 5.3.
Yeah, it should. It should. It's the same animation, Cobb.
Oh my god, are you serious?
I'm serious. I'm telling you, it's always been FF11. Yeah. And when we go to reconstitute Lilithset to have this final confrontation, Arden, I am intentionally skipping over Rajalis right now because that makes more sense to talk about when we go into the Adergon thing.
Okay.
Yep. I know I'm skipping over this critical part. Rajalis is the name of Lilithset's father that she has been trying to save by fucking with the timeline, and then uncovers this greater scheme. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I just want to make a note here.
Mm-hmm.
The tears of the goddess, right?
Yep.
And they're turning to the agents. I'm thinking both of the spoilers for the Gathering Quest. The tear-like Oracite thing, like
you're getting it
in
now.
the meteors.
Yep.
And the fact that in Final Fantasy Tactics, the Oracite of Virgo, Ultima, is shaped like a tear.
You're getting it now.
Okay.
The tears do turn into Catchy, like a lot of different versions of Catchy. Kate Sith, if you take the American reading. So they just walk around and sass you and like try to get things on track the way that the goddess wants. So that's kind of how they manifest as like people that you can interact with as little tiny Catchies in the style of, excuse me, the one that you run into in the Void Ark quests.
I'm glad you said Ketchi, because if you say Kate Sith, it's not because you're American, it's because you're wrong.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It's very much intended to be Ketchi in 11. So when you go to reconstitute Lilithset, you basically have to pick up all of these orbs in different areas, and you put them together to create an egg, and then you cradle her with your memories in order to recreate this person. This should sound very FF13 to Meowth, because you're like, the memory of this person is the thing that will keep them alive after death. Turns out the wings of the goddess, you are one of the wings. Lilithset is the other wing. It's not like the actual wings of the goddess, it's you being like an extension of the goddess's will in this instance in order to maintain the correct version of events. I don't fully agree with that. I don't like being made into a tool by the Crystal Lady, who never tells me the truth about anything. This should sound familiar to Heidelin again.
Yes.
But what's important about this is this trail that you follow, they are dawn drops. You are literally taking a trail of dawn to reconstitute a memory in order to find salvation in the rejoining. I shit you not, that's what this quest is. It's a dawn trail. It's explicitly dawn trail.
Explicitly and quite literally,
Yeah.
Dawntrail.
They hit you over the head with it. It's a lot. That's basically Wings of the Goddess. You kind of prevent a rejoining. This is one of the longer expansions.
Let me process this. So we are one part of Altana's wing,
Correct.
right? The player character.
And Lilithset is the other way.
And Lilithset is the other. And she has an alternate version of herself that is Lilith.
Correct. Lilith from another reality. So it's not another shard, but it is a version of her that would be rejoined if she did not take action first.
Okay. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
because,
It's a lot. Hold on. I have
Yeah.
a screenshot of us reconstituting. Where did I put it? I don't think I have it readily.
Am I going crazy? I'm seeing as
Yeah.
No, you're not. Yeah.
animates everywhere.
Now,
Yeah.
let me ask this: when did Wings of
Yes.
the Goddess release?
Okay, so this is the thing I was going to get to. Wings of the Goddess was an expansion that released over the course of several years. A lot of people did not finish Wings of the Goddess for this reason, because there was a main story, and then because you were going back in time to the Crystal War, you also had to complete a main story for a city-state during their portion of the war. And
Yeah.
the patch releases would alternate between the stories. So you'd start working with Lilithset and doing all of that, and then 4 months later, you'd have to do a city-state story, and you couldn't just do one or the other. And then 4 months later, you would get to do more Wings of the Goddess, and then 4 months later, another city-state story, and it went on this way for years. It took them so long to complete that by the time that they got there, Abyssia content had come out, and a lot of people just never finished Wings of the Goddess because they were busy doing the endgame rating. Abyssia
Yeah.
being a version of the timeline where, remember we talked about Altana crying, and therefore, like, there was a split in time, I guess is the best way to talk about it, at the end of Promathia. Abyssia content is where the emptiness started winning. So Prish is alone in that reality, kind of fighting off that. That's what Abyssia content is.
Mhm.
It's hard to explain. I know it's not 100% correct, Arden, but I'm like doing my best here.
Yeah. And also, just to give a frame of reference, Wings of the Goddess released on PC November 22nd, 2007. It came out on consoles in May 12th of that same year. It was delayed on PC for manufacturing reasons.
Yeah, it's the Wings of the Goddess release schedule was rough. While I'm on the Abyssia note, that's why Prish wearing her hat in the patch art is so important, because it means it's base game Chains of Promathia, because she doesn't wear it in the Abyssia timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
won't be fucking with time in the Alliance raids, probably, which is nice to know, because we've got enough of that going on in the main story as well.
Oh, and here's another frame of time reference. Heroes of Abyssia came out December 7th, 2010.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I forget how much of 11 history is like lost because the release schedule's impacted so much. Like,
yeah.
again, I'm playing through this with someone who's been playing it
No,
since
but
the
at the
original
same
release.
at
So
the same time, the bastards are surely taking advantage of not so many people finishing all those things because they take refuge in not many people
Exactly.
realizing that they
Yeah.
are actually taking these elements for their story building. Which means that someone that's familiar enough with all the at this point all the new age of Square Enix, we came from the Squaresoft era in the past hour. Now we're heading into the Square Enix era, the Square Enix era, which is 11, 12, 13, 15 because it's 13, and 16 because it's a retail of 13.
yeah. So this is the point where I'll go back to Adergon, because there is a gaping hole in the Wings of the Goddess story that I left out, and that's Lilith's motivations for dealing with the past stuff. I mentioned it was to try and save her father, right? Her father made a pact with an entity in order to gain power that kind of tipped the sides in all of this. And this is something that has been pulling the strings on this story the entire time that it's been going. And I've kind of been dancing around it. And the reason I waited with Adergon is because we needed a lighthearted break here, because some of the fun things in Dawntrail, like the Mamulja, all of their cultural stuff, that came from Adergon. That's that expansion. Zoralja's like character and philosophy and the way he became feral at the end, that's Rosfod Parallel, who is a character in Adergon. It was the vacation expansion that ended up leaving me a sobbing mess by the end of it.
Yeah.
It was
Literally,
marketed. Yeah, it was marketed the same way Dawntrail was. It's like, oh, it's a vacation. Nothing's gonna go wrong. You just finished your first big story arc. Aren't you ready to go west and see a new continent and have a good time?
Yeah, people were wondering why I was so doubtful that Dawntrail was going to be a vacation expansion, and it was really hard to explain that I've been through this before.
And the fact that they marketed it with the same Mamulja, like, riding in on a rhino, like, oh yeah, look at this, we're having a good time. Ow. So the setting for Adergon is you go west to this continent that you have not been to before. There's Mamulja there. There's a whole bunch of like new civilizations for you to learn about. And there's a political conflict going on because this empire is currently without a true ruler. Now, we know that there is someone who is taking the throne who is an empress. And for the time being, there is a custodian in place who is Rosfod, her older brother. Now, Rosfod's idea is, what if we stopped being peaceful? What if we conquered the rest of the continent in order to create everlasting peace? Again, Zoralja counterpart, and he's doing this very much with technology. He is a blue mage. Blue mages in 11, they absorb abilities like they do in 14, except in order to do so, you absorb a piece of that animal's soul. Does this sound familiar to things that we are seeing in the Arcadian? Yeah. We've talked a little bit about this before, right? So that's just to give you context on that. We go in and we join a mercenary company. It's all a very good time to try and figure out what's going on. And essentially, there is a prince of a conquered nation of Ephraimod who has mysteriously come back to life. And this prince's name is Luzoff, and he's very dreamy. I do love
He's
Luzoff.
so dreamy.
He's so dreamy. He's such a gallant knight. I love Luzoff. Can we get a photo of Luzoff, actually? I want to look at him.
Actually, yeah.
Oh,
I love
someone
Luzoff
who
is
has
why I
been
played Corsair.
someone who has been brought to life.
Yeah, so he died. He was killed.
Uh-huh.
And then made a pact to return to life. Here's an image of Luzoff. He's very pretty. My Viper Glam in 14 is inspired by him.
Why am I thinking of Sphene again? Anyways.
We'll get there. So this is Luzoff. He's been brought back to life, and like he is essentially an undead pirate prince is what he's been relegated to. He hits all of those archetypes where you're like, this is like the person that they're purporting as a villain who isn't actually a villain.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said Gabbro in chat. Don't put that thought in my head right now. I got way sidetracked. I do love them both dearly. If they put Luzov in 14, I don't want them to whitewash him. He is an example of the fact that they actually gave melanin to a lot of characters in 11 and did it really well. A lot of fan art of him does whitewash him, and it bothers me. That's kind of a tangent. Please don't draw him as a white person.
It's so bad.
Yeah. But he's very pretty. He's dreamy to look at, and he's genuinely just a nice guy. So the Empress.
Ayumi, just I hit me. Doesn't this guy remind you of Alcide Margrace in 12?
Don't insult
Did you just
Luzov
say
like this.
hit me?
Why would you say those words, Mia?
Did you? Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
I said Alcide Margrace. That's all I said.
No, that's a clip. We're gonna go back.
I don't know if I said anything else. My intention was to
No.
say Alcide Margrace.
Okay. So basically, the Empress that is kind of coming into her power and just kind of letting her brother take over right now. She goes to try and investigate what's been going on, because Luzov has kind of been trying to poke at defenses and all sorts of stuff, starting conflict with Beastmen to try and see if he can raise Ephraimod back to where it was, or at the very least get revenge for what had happened to his city-state. And in the process of this, we find out that he really is just a sweet guy. He doesn't actually want to do vengeance. He just wants to restore his civilization. On the photo that we have on screen right now, does anybody recognize the background that he's standing in? You should. It's a location we have in 14.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that? It reminds me of Thavner.
Oh yeah, you're actually very close. It is something that we get in the tail end of Endwalker patch content.
Alcedal?
Yeah, it's Alzadal.
Yeah.
Yep. So Alzadal is just straight up a place in Adergon. It's where they used to do a lot of relic stuff in Treasures of Adergon. Alzadal's legacy is basically just pieces of Alexander in 11. Yeah. You see where we're going with this. There is actually an apocalypse in Adergon that we are trying to stop. We find out towards the tail end of the expansion, because the thing that brought Luzov back to life from the afterlife is Odin. And the way that Odin grants people power is by asking a question. Hast thou sated thy rage? It's that specific phrasing, and it brings me chills every single time it comes up. Basically, the deal that Odin will grant you is you will get power. You can summon him. You can do what you need to do. You can come back from the dead. Whatever you need, it depends on the person who's making the pact. That is the power that he will grant you. However, in exchange, the moment that your rage has been sated, you take Odin's place. The whole shtick in 14, where if you defeat Odin in the overworld, if you're the person who lands the last blow, it's your face on Odin the next time around. That transfer of power, that's an 11 thing. What's important to note is these pacts with Odin are always... Yeah. I think Cobb just put together where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
There you are, Meowth, you're clipped.
Yeah. These pacts with Odin are always made out of love. In Luzov's case, it was love for his people. I highly recommend people to, even if you're not going to watch any of the other cutscenes in Adergon, watch the final confrontation and the cutscene that happens after it, because what eventually happens is Luzov wants to help Nashmira, the Empress, take power back from her brother Rosfod, who is, a conquering imperialist who's slowly losing his mind due to Blue Mage stuff. And the way he tries to circumvent that is by combining himself with Alexander.
Everyone loses their mind doing Blue Mage stuff.
Right, yeah. But yeah, it's
What was that?
Should we just say what happens if you Blue Mage in 11?
Oh,
I think
yeah.
we should.
If you go feral, if you absorb too much stuff, if you destroy your soul, you become a mind flayer.
Sick.
That is, yeah.
Amazing.
That is thing, and it's the same model that they use for Mind Flayers in 14, so there is a chance that the Blue Mage stuff we've been doing is surface level scratching what actually happens in 11. So Rosfod is a really powerful Blue Mage. Because this is something that happens to you, they're like... They're an honored part of the military, they're respected, but they're also treated as less than human. It's why Rosfod, as the older brother, does not get to be the actual emperor. It falls to his sister, who is not a Blue Mage. So Rosfod, in an effort to hold on to power, and also not degrade into a Mind Flayer, he combines himself with Alexander. A la the way that we see Wicked Thunder combined with Electrope in Arcadian. However, there is a prophecy that Ragnarok comes about when Alexander and Odin are around at the same time. So that's essentially the final confrontation. Some of the best music in 11 plays during this fight. Ragnarok is a really good theme. I highly recommend looking it up on YouTube. There's a really good Distant Worlds arrangement of it. Distant Worlds, the concert series, not Distant Worlds, the song in 11. I realized in hindsight that was confusing.
Yeah.
In this confrontation, Luzov's rage is sated because he gives up on it. But instead of Odin immediately taking him back to Valhalla and, like, making Luzov into Odin at that point in time, because Luzov gave up on it for a new kind of love, a peaceful love, he was allowed to stay, and yet he dies anyway because Rosfod decides to try and shoot his sister, and Luzov takes the hit for her. Oh, it hurts me so bad. And keep in mind on that is he does die, and because he returns to Valhalla, he does take Odin's place at this point in time. Do you remember when I talked way back in the base game about Raugrim gaining power in order to sate his rage at the loss of a loved person who died for him? The thing that had granted him power, we learned retroactively in Wings of the Goddess, was Odin. Odin has been pulling these strings the entire time. Part of the reason that Wings of the Goddess is happening is because Lilith is friends with Odin and has Odin make a pact with her father from the timeline where he survives in order to keep him alive when they do the whole rejoining of realities. The thing that has been the catalyst for all of this the entire time has been Odin asking the question, "Hast thou sated thy rage?"
It sounds so much like an Orsite pact.
Yes! I'm like, this is where I shall, like, give you this gift, Meowth. Is because this is where 11 has been the entire time. The Tears of the Goddess, all of this, it all leads back to these pacts being made out of a desperate desire to keep your love alive. It's so good. It's so beautiful. The way that the story continues to compound on itself in parallels and all of that, this reveal, more than anything else, it shocked me to my very core. And this is saying something, because when I finished Treasures of Adargon, no lie, we got to that last cutscene with Luzov, I had to walk away from my computer and go stand outside the rain and cry for like 10 minutes before I could come back. I remember this so vividly. The people I was on the phone with actually had to call my cell phone and ask if I needed like to go talk to somebody. I was like that deep in my emotions. It's just...
But in regards to Orsite,
beautiful.
in regards to Orsite, Ayumi, help me a bit here in case I fuck up something.
That's fine. I'm here.
But the difference in Orsite, I mean, it's not explicitly stated in Tactics, because in Tactics itself, Orsite is never really properly explained as to what it can do, what it can. But we know that there's a trend in Orsite pacts when the wielder of Orsite is in self-desperation, be it rage, be it grief, be it anger, be it in the verge of death. That's when the Lucavi use the self-need of survival or satiate and a desire that to take part of the host. But
I would defer to what Ultima says about it, especially about her Orsite, because she was the originator of it, which is it Sanctum you seek, my wayward children? Now take up your salvation and be gone. So if it's sanctum you seek, or is it power that you seek, that which lies at your feet can grant you both.
But there's one instance, very, very poignant moment in tactics in which Oracite, instead of acting like this conduit for the Lucavi to take over someone, instead performs a true miracle, which is the moment with Rafa and Marak.
Yes.
When Marak takes the hit from Count Barrington that was aimed to his sister and dies, and and Rafa holds the Scorpioracite, and she's pleading to her brother to not leave her. That's when the Oracite of Scorpio answers and calls back Marak's soul from the afterlife and revives him. That's the one time that we see Oracite, and of course that's why we know that Oracite can actually revive people. And that's when and after that, Ramza and Marak have a conversation that Marak says that I felt someone call to me in that land of pure white, and the voice said, "Return to the side of the valiant," referring to Ramza, and that he decided he didn't know whose voice was, but that he decided to follow the voice and return to life. There's a big difference there, and it makes me think that this is a theme that we see a lot with Oracite, which is it doesn't depend that the real power of Oracite, whether it's used for evil or for good, that actually perform illusion tricks or real miracles, depends on the intention on the heart of the wielder. If you're going to use it for your self-profit, whatever way it is, then you're basically inviting a Lucavi to take over you. But if you're going to use
the
it,
difference between that, we actually see the difference between that. Well, it's the way we see it in 14 is it's not benevolent, but the difference with Argath and Begamnon is they turned into two separate Lucavi creatures. One turned into Doom and the other one turned into Yazmat. Both had very separate desires and wants and needs. But they wielded the same Oricites. They just turned into two separate creatures.
I'm trying to pull up the specific language that they use in the encyclopedia about it in the most recent publication, because in 14 when they talk about this stuff, it's like your soul's truest desire, and if your desire is exactly the same, you become the same Esper as Cost. There is recorded history of that in the 14 context of Oracite. It's fundamentally the idea of making this pact out of love will grant you this, but it's just so good. It's so well written. I think about it so often, and I wanted to talk about it in the context of Odin as a grander thing, because it makes more sense than just dropping that bomb in Wings of the Goddess when you can bring it back to that scale. I just love the idea of this same pact for power being made again and again, because it's not like Odin is malicious. It's just the way that it manifests is always tragic, because that is the nature of trying to do something about tragically doomed love. It's so poetic. It's so good. It's so good. So I personally, like, I don't know where I'm going with this. I just love it. It's very, very well written.
Yeah,
I'm thankful to get to share this with you all. I don't know that I would want this in the Alliance raids, because, like you guys have pointed out, this is something that's more applicable to the main story of 14 right now than anything else, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said earlier, a lot of this loses a lot without the context, and trying to shove this much into an Alliance raid series just wouldn't work.
Right. That's why the Alliance raids being like everything we've seen so far is like Zealart and Promathia is fun, because that's something that we can make digestible, and like the stuff we've seen with Fafnir and the Dragon's Eyrie goes into a little bit of the dragon culture too, right? So I don't necessarily think that the stuff we've talked about on the metaphysical level with like timelines and Odin and all of that is going to be stuff that we're getting in the
No,
Alliance raids, at least
no,
not in
no,
that
no.
manifestation. But like the Walk of Echoes does make more sense when you put it in the context of realities merging, and there's a Dynamis sky, so maybe we're entering like a hunter's dream of Vana'diel. Or maybe we're getting those concepts introduced into 14.2, which I personally think would be a very good thing, because the way that they handle time travel in Wings of the Goddess, it negates most of the multiverse concerns that we have about 14. If they take that route, I will feel way better about the solidity of the writing going forward.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just had such a brainwave.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that the Alliance raid is one of the Moblins dreaming about Vana'diel.
Right? That would be,
Wow.
yeah, so I didn't even mention this. That's a good thing you brought that up, Arden. Because we have Moblins in 14 now, right? And they talk about this city that they found called Movil Polos. So we know that Movil Polos is a place on Aetheris now, right? We just have confirmation of that. Movil Polos is the underground city where they attempted to bury Promathia originally, and it's safeguarded by the Moblins who were superstitious about it.
Well, they said that there is a sunken drone, whether a city of Malpolos. They don't remember them saying that they found it. Only that it's kind of like a legend in Twirl. But correct me if I'm wrong, of course.
I mean, they did find it. Like it's in the craft and gathering quest that they dug into the city, and then they dug too far and they got washed out, so they haven't been able to get back to it. Yeah.
I haven't done those quests, so I didn't know. All I know is that there was a mention there. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is a place that they have actually been to. So that is another inn that was like, oh, we knew we were getting Promathia, because that is the thing that Movil Polos is known for, is being like the place where they attempted to bury him. Yeah.
Right. So okay. So it's kind of like this. I mean, yeah. I mean, it could our entry point to this race could be the Moblins after all. Yeah.
Yeah, it could, because Moblins, even their architecture, the drawings that we see on their pot shards, that is all Promathian symbology that is seen in Movalpolos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So what I was going to make the comment before is that there's something that I find really interesting about choosing this raid series based on Vana'diel for Dawntrail, which is supposedly to be the first part of this story arc, which they've mentioned before it was going to be 3 expansions, this one, next one, and 9.0. Of course, we don't know if they're going to stick to that, but that was mentioned. But still, I find it quite interesting because, I mean, it feels to me like they're introducing Vana'diel as a way to introduce us to the story of 11, but because the story of 11 is so massive, and most people are not going to get it, it's going to also work as a form of introducing us to a basic level of 11 meta-narrative to the casual player. Of course, not that most of the fan base gets the meta-narrative as it is,
right.
But for lore divers, it's certainly going to help to look back later on this raid series and be like, oh, so this whole story arc was actually based on the structure of this raid series, which is what usually happens, to be fair. But like in difference with other more quote unquote popular titles, and I say quote unquote because the reference to the 13th trilogy are not exactly subtle, but not so many people have been recognizing them. So there's that. They're kind of like more recent, more people have played, there's more possibility that you're going to recognize that. But with 11, considering the sheer scale of the work as in the piece of work that it is 11, as it is an MMO with a long story, it's kind of like a basic introduction to Vana'diel to, in the end, tie everything together as this was actually part of the well, the point of this new arc, if it makes sense. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself.
No, you're entirely right there. Dawntrail has very much been the FF11 expansion. Like, we knew Echoes of Vana'diel was coming from the beginning, but like the second that we started getting any promotional material for Dawntrail, because it started with the stuff that was very clearly Gone, the way it was being marketed, all the Mamulja, all of that is like a very one-for-one direct reference. It is very Gone in that sense. And it's also Gone in the sense that, like, it felt like a one-off isolated package when you started it, but like in hindsight, it was the critical thing that answered all of the questions for later expansions of the game. It is the pivotal piece that ended up tying it all together. And I know everyone here feels that way about Dawntrail, like this is the key, so to speak, to the rest of the story. But then also getting Rise of the Zealart in this way, it was just so cleverly done, packaging it with the 9 and the 13 elements, because these things fit together so well for the story and bringing them to you in a whole new way. And adding the Alliance raids on top of it, that is the tip of the iceberg at this point. And that's how I gave my 11 presentation at Gateway, was I literally did an iceberg, because there is so very much of it. And that's just Dawntrail. A lot of what we talked about today was also stuff that's like in all of the other expansions too, like all of the parts that people love and talk about in 14. In some way, we got that from 11, and I just love that 14 is able to take these ideas and make these references, direct and indirect, and add onto them in its own unique way of storytelling. It's just beautiful. It's so well done, and I have nothing but respect for everyone involved in it, because it brings me to my knees in awe.
It's also well integrated, unlike the Void arc. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to be salty forever about that. But the thing, so it fascinates me on a not meta narrative, just meta level. If what they're aiming to is almost like a love letter to their Square Enix era, which, by the way, we have to be in context of the Final Fantasy history, of the franchise history here, as we have the Squaresoft era, which is mostly what most people they're objectively really good, this era, but most people tend to overhype. Like, the Squaresoft era was the real era of Final Fantasy. That was what the real part of Final Fantasy was, the core. And after Square Enix happened, it went to hell. Not realizing that 14 is actually part of Square Enix. but it's if we go to a meta level, that they're actually doing this tie between the Squaresoft era as the past arc and the Square Enix era as this new arc. Like, we came from the past, we go into the sequel, if you want to go meta here. Then 9 and 10, which are two titles that we've seen superficial, and kind of like a superficial way, like the plating of Dawntrail are there, which are the two final titles for the Squaresoft era, right? Then the real bridge between the Squaresoft era and the Square Enix era would be 11, but because not so many people have played it, it's mostly ignored. But that's actually the real bridge. And then that's when we go into 12, which is basically taking from, well, first and 12, that's Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which is another kind of worms. But 12 takes from Tactics, which was Squaresoft era. It was actually previous to Final Fantasy 9, and 9 pays a lot to Tactics because it was released earlier, and then it's come to the rest. So, yeah, it does work. 11 does work as the bridge between the two eras, really. And meta speaking is genius.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so glad that at least I hope y'all have enjoyed going on this tangent today. I realize I've been talking quite a bit. This is truly the passion of my heart. I say this with my whole chest. I think 11 is my favorite Final Fantasy game. Hands down. Because it is just such a masterwork of
Yeah.
references in the same way that 14 is, but I have genuinely never cried harder than at the end of Treasures of Etergon. It's so well done. And the fact that they can do that without any voiced lines either is impressive. Other things that they do, all of the cutscenes are rendered in engine, so the way that the characters interact with each other for the time and the engine that they're running the game in, it's such an impressive feat of game development. You can tell
It really
so much,
is.
so much love went into it. And it's a shame that more people haven't played 11 because it is like the least played game. And I understand why. It's difficult to install, it's difficult to play, but it is, if you take the time to do it, it is worth the effort. And if you don't,
Yeah.
watch the cutscenes, go listen to the music, go replay and re-listen to parts of Final Fantasy XIV, thinking about like all of the stuff we've talked about today with the dragons and the music and Shadowbringers, all of that. It's worth going back with that lens. And if nothing else, I sincerely hope that everyone enjoys the Alliance raids to have even a fraction of the experience that playing 11 gives you, because it really is so wonderful.
I have
Awesome.
a couple more questions, but let Cobb speak.
Oh no, I really just want to get back into playing 11 at this point. It just makes me excited to keep going on this journey, because I know despite everything we've talked about, it's really only scratching the surface, because there's all of
There's
the
so
moments-
much.
Yeah. Like it's
Yeah,
like trying
there's so
to
much.
it's like trying to describe all of 14 in
Yeah.
a couple of hours, but at the same time 11's been running a lot longer and there's a lot more. So
Yeah, and
Right.
like seeing the cutscenes and like their cinematography and like the music they pair with it and everything also just hits different than us like just talking about it.
Yeah, for all the spoilers I've given today, I am a firm believer that if a spoiler ruins something for you, it wasn't good to begin with.
yeah.
Because it just means it's poorly written. I have not even begun to do justice to the emotion behind Final Fantasy XI, to how beautiful and wonderful this game is. If you have the opportunity, if you just want to sit down and watch the cutscenes, please do so. I am humbly asking this.
Yeah, we can link some of the cutscene movies in Discord to make it easier for people too.
Yes.
There's plenty of options.
I would ask something. I have two questions mainly in my head about 11. One of them is the thing about cognition, because right now with the whole ultimate deal, it seems to be a big thing, considering, especially Dawntrail basically underlining this, with the main force that we fight in this expansion being an almost like a representation of reason, though it's actually a fake form of reason, which is AISV as the queen of reason. So we're basically against a form of knowledge there. But we know that she's basically an AI. That's actually not the real Sphene. She is modeled after the idealization of Sphene from many other memories given by preservation, but that's a whole different story. So cognition is so interesting to me in that regard, because, well, it ties with the whole thing of, well, and we could go into Persona 5 here, but let's
Right.
not. But I'm suspecting that there's going to be a lot of Jungeon psychology in this new arc. And I love that, because I love Jungeon psychology and alchemy, because lots of Jungeon psychology comes from alchemical theory. But aside from that, there's another thing that I would like to also ask, is about the Aeneas expansion, because you guys have been referencing and referring to Aeneas so much about the new world. And
Well,
also,
Etergon.
the whole thing about the world tree, the leaf king, and all that stuff. And Rakasnar, because that was referred directly in Dawntrail as well.
So what's the question?
If you could elaborate a bit more in the context behind the whole thing about Adulin, Rakasnar, direct references that doesn't seem that clear as of now.
Well, so that's kind of the thing, is it's not clear right now,
Mhm.
and that's part of why I personally haven't talked about it, is a lot of it is just like, the item is in game. This location looks like Adalin, but there's not enough in 14 yet to kind of give a, here is what it means, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Arden agrees. A lot of it we've already covered, of this forest looks like Adalin. I think this will be something where it would be worth returning to it when we finish with Dawntrail patch content and the Alliance raids, because then we'll be able to actually extrapolate on if there's going to be more related to it or not.
My personal read is I think they're going to be playing the long game with the Adeline references because of
Right.
what content is there in the Adeline story. There's a lot there to work with, and I don't think it's stuff that's going to be like relegated to the Alliance raid specifically. Like, I could see Rick Kaznar being part of the Alliance raid just by nature of like it'd be a good stage, because it is in game in 11. It is technically like a dungeon / labyrinth kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
there's just not a lot there yet. And we're hoping there will be more. It's not like the one-for-one stuff in Addergon,
I feel like
just the setting. Here it's like, here's hints of it, but there's not enough for us to like be like, oh, here's what it means. We don't have.
Yeah, I think if we wanted to talk about Adeline, we would need like a dedicated episode where we just theory craft about where they're going with.
Yeah.
Because
the
you guys have
references, because there's a
mentioned-
lot of potential, but nothing solid.
Yeah, because you guys have mentioned the whole thing about Leaf King and the World Tree related to Adulin. Perhaps they're saving Adulin, not for next expansion perhaps, but there's kind of building the grounds for Mercidia, because World Tree.
Yeah, grander concepts is where we're at, but nothing specific where I can point to it like Prisha's hat and say, this is exactly what we're getting.
Right.
It's
because
like, okay, there's a thing here, but it's lacking the context to do the proper analysis, so anything we say right now would be pure speculation with nothing to go off of.
Yeah, which, on the speculation note, things of note regarding Adeline and 14 is there's definitely a lot of parallels in Taral, but there's, in my opinion, more parallels in Aloe Aloe Island visually. So I'm wondering if they're going to do something weird like Mericidia does end up being like either our Adeline, like our version of the Ubulka continent rather, or they pull some World Tree stuff because of Sephiroth and the Tree People.
Yeah. Well, we will hopefully find out eventually. We will find out something, though, because if they continue the trend of 14 pulling from 11, we have yet to get there, but we'll get there.
And like, so one of the things that people told me to get me to finally try Final Fantasy 14 back in the 1.0 era was the fact that it was marketed as an 11 sequel. And I've kind of always been of the opinion of like, well, is that something that's really going to go away just because they rebooted the game?
Yeah, wasn't Adeline also around the time that they were actually releasing 14 to begin with?
Yes.
Secrets of Adeline original release was 2013. So this was when they started blurring the lines. And you can tell when you enter Adeline areas, they really popped off with the MIDI music.
They did. It's so good.
I will say
and
that I'll say that 14, it very much feels in some instances like almost a retelling of 11, but repackaged, kind of like they're doing with a lot of the other Final Fantasy games, where they weave the big story elements of 11 together with what worked in the other games. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I tend to think of 14 as a greatest hits where they just take the best of and weave them together into a coherent story that just works really well. And that's what I think 14 is best at. Even though 14 doesn't have too many original things of its own, it's good at taking what worked and making it better.
And making it into its own original thing. They're taking
Right.
the emotional story beats and concepts that worked really well and expanding on it
Yeah.
into its own thing. And it
Yeah.
works brilliantly. Also,
So-
side note, there's a really hot accountant in Edelin. That's extremely up my alley. Once again, I have fallen for the extremely obvious villain. Don't laugh at me, Arden.
So
He's pretty.
I'm basically thinking here about what you were mentioning about Adeline and 14 being where they started blurring lines. I've got ideas in my speculation, and this concept, meta-wise, would fit. But again, it's speculation, madcap speculation right now, so I wouldn't put any finger on that.
Let's do an 11 sequel episode once we finish Dawntrail patch content, and then we can probably go in and say, oh yeah, here's what we got, and here's where it's going.
But I'm thinking of themes like the whole thing. Arden knows we've discussed this extensively. The thing about 11 Hades. There's also Arcilla, which I only know about because of the Opera Omnia, but I always found interesting. She was kind of busted in Opera Omnia, by the way. But she is both light and darkness user in the Opera Omnia. Not sure if in 11 is the same. So all of these things make me think of themes that I've been kind of speculating, but it gives me the feeling that Adeline is like the climax of this new arc for some reason. I'm not sure if you're going to agree with me in that.
I wouldn't say so, but that's just because 14 is again doing the thing where it's expanding on stuff. So it'll take concepts from it like it does for everything else. But the idea of again, me being Nordic, a world tree coming into play, especially with the fact that Odin in FF11 is the actual best representation of my actual culture in any sort of external media that I have ever seen, bar none. I wouldn't be surprised if that team that they've brought to 14 as well, because a lot of the original 11 developers are now working on 14 as well. I would love to see that come to 14 as just a personal thing, because that is something near and dear to my heart.
Being Nordic, you're going to love Final Fantasy 13.
I know. We've talked about this. You said you had a second question too, Meowth. I know that we are super over time at this point.
The other one was the thing about cognition.
Yes. Yeah, so the idea of cognition, we touched on this about Endless Paradise in 14 being essentially what the Gate of the Gods was going to do. What's important now that you have the context of Wings of the Goddess is that if the Gate of the Gods had been opened, the avatars of Altana would cease to exist as cognizant beings. The powering up of the crystal line connecting all of the crystals would effectively destroy the sentience of these avatars. Now that we know the truth of them through Promathia and Wings of the Goddess, there is a second reading of that where Altana, the thing kind of binding the world together, would cease to exist, and what that would mean for life itself. Because the avatars would cease to exist as cognizant beings. They would simply just be feral creatures. And we do see examples of that happening during Wings of the Goddess. Notably, during the Windhurst quests, Fenrir gets summoned in order to stop a threat of assault on the city, and slowly loses his mind after that summoning. So that's generally the change in cognition that happens there, because you would presumably, as something less than an avatar, also cease to exist as a person. It asks the question of, we know that emptiness eats away at your physical being. What happens to emptiness eating away at your soul, at your memory? What do you become if not a husk of something devoid of life but still existing? It is a terrifying question to ask, and again leads us back down the line of what I perceive to be Ultima energy in 14. So that's generally the idea of where that goes in.
So it's
In
not
14
it's not
speculation.
so much about the concept of cognition itself, but rather the
lot of
sense of yourself, your ego,
Yeah.
so to speak. And that is what the emptiness causes, right? It's
Well,
a way at it corrupts
theoretically.
your it's a way at it sorry. It's a way at your flesh, it's a way at your soul.
Yeah, that's the idea. We don't know quite what happens to your soul, to your memory when it gets eaten away at, but we know that like it's called emptiness for a reason because that's all that left when it passes through. What did you just link, Arden?
They posted that an hour and 15 fucking minutes ago.
I'm gonna throw this up because this is.
Yeah, so this is from the Divine Might instance. Whoever at Square Enix is watching me talk about Final Fantasy XI right now, I'm gonna find you and shake your hand. Why are you doing this?
They literally just posted this.
I'm being haunted. I'm being hunted for sport. Mustadio has a sniper rifle of lore aimed directly at me, and I can't escape. Why? Why am I being targeted? Yoshi P, what did I ever do to you? Why do I know too much?
No wonder it killed so many people in Stormblood.
Oh my god. Okay, that's so funny. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm going insane. See, me, whenever I post about shit, the fact that something like this happens immediately after, it makes me feel like I'm being watched. It makes me feel like at any point in time, Square Enix is going to say, she knows too much, take her out, get her.
The community manager for 11 is in our stream right now.
Oh no.
I mean, I would say own it, you know?
I don't want to make myself a target. No, but that is to kind of bring it to a good wrap-up point. The Archangels, fun fact, they have been in the game basically since it started. It's a 22-year-old game now. People have wanted those glamour items for as long as the game has existed, and they started putting them in the game only a few months ago.
Yeah.
Around the time that they started posting promotion for Echoes of Vana'diel. There is a strong chance that the Archangel attire is going to be the first gear set from the Alliance raids.
Oh
If
my
so,
God.
you will never catch me wearing anything else ever again.
People will lose their minds.
Right.
I also want to point out that on October 12th, they posted a fucking gif of Fafnir.
Yeah, that was from the... In the Korea Fan Fest, they showed another preview of Echoes of Vana'diel. This happened while we were at Gateway, actually, and people kept coming up to me and asking me about it. It was hilarious.
Yeah. You got any tips for fighting that worm?
Fafnir. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is not the biggest revelation that you think. This is more just we're exploring Vana'diel. But it was still very, very cool to have people sprint up to me with pictures of dragons while I was dressed as Nagmalata. It was like, did you see? Did you see? I'm like, yes, I did. Thank you. This is funny for reasons I can't explain to you right now. This is a safe for work panel. We can't talk about Nagmalata fucking, but I could say it here. They fucked. Sorry, community manager listening to this.
I will say for anyone who is considering getting into Final Fantasy XI at this point in time, who is also a Final Fantasy XIV fan, there are two types of players who play both games. You're either going to love all of the connections between the two games, or you are going to get unreasonably angry at how much 14 just takes from 11.
Yeah.
I encourage you to love it, though, because a lot of it is... I was just talking about Nagmalata and Bahamut fucking, right? That's the Shiva Hraesvelgr and then, like, Nidhogg causing a war kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They don't take the story beats one for one, and when they do, like they did with Dawntrail, they still do something new with it. Take it as the love letter to 11 that it is, because they are such great story beats that they are worth exploring in different contexts again and again and again. It's a never-ending story.
If I make an observation that intrigues me about the caption they put with this tweet, the darkness that lurks within us all. not so like the other day. I was going on a stream about analyzing one musical theme,
Yeah.
and I ended up in a tirade about how, as of now, the concept of, well, Asm is basically our Jungian shadow. Is that part of ourselves that we have not embraced yet. We don't. We know that we are Asm's reincarnation, but as the Word of Light, we have not embraced the identity of Asm. We basically know nothing about ourselves at this point. So it's raising all my alarms, because if Asm is the Jungian shadow, then again it's a tie with embracing darkness. So,
Yeah,
and they've been pushing the theme of embracing darkness, embracing that you once believed evil in the seasonal events twice now.
Yeah, go have fun re-looking at all of the Shadowbringers lyrics again with the context of the knowledge.
I think I'm going to go into stream myself to analyze lyrics after this. So honestly,
Yeah, have all of the fun in the world. I have not forgotten that the first time I described Nagbalada, you're like, wow, that's could be a shard, and I was like, don't grant me this. I want this so badly now. But yeah, I just genuinely thank you for letting me go absolutely off the rails in a longer episode today. I love 11 so much, and I never really get a chance to expound on it in a setting like this. I hope this hasn't been too intense or counterpoint boring for all of you.
No, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information, especially because a lot of people don't know a lot about 11. It's kind of a black box to a lot of people that just think of it as, oh, it's the Final Fantasy MMO that came before 14. There's no real story there. It's just a grind fest. So it's good to know that, once you get into it, there's actually quite a bit of meat to that. So I'm really happy to learn that, and I'm excited that I'm like right at the cusp of the story beginning, right at the end of Rise of the Zealot. So that's awesome. But thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We've been going for a lot longer than normal, and so it's about time to wrap up. But thank you again, and we look forward to seeing everybody again next week. Aeneas, thank you for bringing your 11 expertise.
Who are we
Arden
gonna have
as well.
next week?
Oh, next
Come
week.
ask us everything you want about 11 in our Discord.
If you have more questions, please join our Discord. They're more than happy to talk about 11 endlessly, as you can see.
I also don't shut up about it on Twitter. So if you see me on there, I'm usually tweeting about 11.
Yeah. Next week, we're going to have another guest on. We're going to have Pebbles on talking about the geology of Final Fantasy XIV. Which is something I'm really interested in because I know nothing about it. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So please join us then. Yay, Pixel Pebbles. How you doing?
It'll be a good time. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. Take care, and thank you so much.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The